Chapter 1203. Amiba. At the foot of the mountain, Jinhan Er's feather robe fluttered as she dashed out. Yaoguang and Xinyuan Weiyang followed closely behind, chasing after Ling Xiao. When they saw this scene, the geniuses from the various sects who were eager to give it a try finally stopped hesitating. They strode forward and competed to flash towards the peak of the mountain. After the experience of the four idiots, no one dared to take 10 steps in one step like Yuan Tianji. The crowd surged forward like a tidal wave. At the foot of the mountain, Yang Yuan stood with his hands clasped behind his back. After 2 days of not seeing each other, the Chosen One looked inexplicably tired. Ever since Zhang Jiuji turned into a demon and fled, he had been secretly looking for news about him. However, before Yang Yuan could find this little brother of his, the news of what had happened in the Spirit Creek Valley spread throughout the Azure Heaven continent. Yang Yuan couldn't accept it. How could such a straightforward and gentle-looking young man be a devil? Even if he didn't know Zhang Jiuji's true identity, he had a strange feeling that he wasn't a demon. There must be some misunderstanding. However, after all, Yang Yuan was only a disciple of a small sect. He didn't even have the right to enter the 10,000 talents banquet. How could he change people's opinions? Therefore, in the past 2 days, he often sighed in sorrow and became more worried about what people said. Until he looked at the straight heavenly path in front of him and saw Yuan Tianji standing at the peak of the mountain, overlooking all living beings. The gloom in Yang Yuan's heart was instantly swept away. If there was anything in this world that could cure unhappiness, then to the Chosen One, it must be bragging. Especially in the past few days, Yang Yuan's bragging wasn't going well. He was often slapped in the face. However, this divine path was an inanimate object. It wouldn't change because of one's background. Physical strength? Mental strength? Yang Yuan, cultivate the jade golden body. How could a mere mountain path stop me from ascending to the heavens? This time, I will let the entire Azure continent know my name, Yang Yuan. Brother Jijio, I believe that we will meet again. When the time comes, I will announce your difficulties to the world. Junior sister, let's go. Yang Yuan took a deep breath. His expression was gentle, and his eyes were filled with an urgent desire to show off. Yes. Xia Zhiming nodded indifferently and looked up at the black-clothed figure that had already reached the halfway point of the mountain. Finally, everything was coming to an end. Xia Zhiming did not know why Ling Xiao had lured Yang Yuan here. However, now that her mission had been accomplished, she was already extremely disgusted with Yang Yuan. She didn't ask for young master's love. As long as she could stay away from this flag dog, she would be satisfied. However, just as the two of them lifted their feet and were about to walk forward, a cheerful laughter suddenly came from behind them. Haha, senior brother, please wait. Yang Yuan frowned slightly. When he turned around, he saw an ordinary-looking young man in a green robe striding over and bowing to him. Senior brother, you look familiar. Have we met before? The young man in the green robe looked at Yang Yuan with a puzzled expression. Familiar? Hearing that, Yang Yuan's eyes did not waver. No, at least, I don't remember seeing you before. Although he had experienced many twists and turns during the 10,000 talents banquet, he had still managed to put on a good show in a few of the minor competitions. For example, he had the spiritual crystal and he had crippled Xiang Kun. Although he did not get what he wanted in the end, compared to the ordinary sex geniuses, the fact that he had defeated Xiang Kun was enough to make him popular. Haha, familiar? Soon, I will let all of you know that I, Yang Yuan, am an existence that none of you can match up to. With that thought, Yang Yuan's eyes turned cold, and he turned around to leave. However, at that moment, the young man in the green robe in front of him suddenly stretched out a hand and pressed it on his shoulder. Senior brother, take a good look. Yang Yuan frowned. The golden light around his body shone brightly and forced the young man to take a few steps back. Then, he said coldly, if you continue to pester me, don't blame me for being rude. Okay. The young man in the green robe smiled brightly. He was not angry. When he saw Yang Yuan's figure disappear, his face turned serious. It is indeed useful. Even those who have fought with me before cannot detect the aura of my divine body. That's right. That person was Zhang Jiuji. Yesterday, he had followed Inyu's guidance and found an ancient site near Daotian City. However, there was no spiritual treasure in it. There was only a golden talisman. According to Inyu, the talisman could conceal one's aura. Even a supreme being would not be able to detect it. Although Yang Yuan's cultivation level was not high, they had fought before and were very familiar with each other's aura. If even he could not detect it, then he could go to the Daotian Academy. Of course, to Zhang Jiuji, as long as Ling Xiao and Huang Mingxi could not recognize him, then the supreme beings in the academy would not know who he was. Therefore, he had already succeeded in half of his trip, a treasure that Inyu saw as the best in the world. Just thinking about it made Xiao Jiuji excited. The road of Dao Mountain was in an uproar. Silhouettes after silhouettes walked along the mountain. Their expressions gradually turned serious, bitter, and then sad. Only those monstrous geniuses who were already famous and had great talent still wanted to prove their strength and work hard to move forward after passing the 500th step. In the end, even someone as strong as Shun Jingan could only reach the 693rd step and could not go any further. Zhao Bado, who had always been weak, went against the flow and finally stopped at the 707th step. However, compared to before, this descendant of the sage of literature's face was no longer cold and aloof. Instead, he looked tired. Gradually, the noise on the mountain path became so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Apart from Xiao Wu and the Grand Princess of the Divine Martial Academy, Wu Hongshou, who was dressed in an imperial robe, only Lord Ling Xiao and the three women behind him were still moving forward. However, the four of them were not in a hurry and had only reached the 700th step. However, it seemed that from the beginning to the end, their expressions did not change at all. Even their speed was not affected at all. Look, who is that? At this time, most of the geniuses from the various sects had stopped climbing. They stood on the mountain path and looked up at the few silhouettes above. At this moment, a cry of surprise suddenly came from the crowd. A young man in a white robe passed by the crowd and headed toward the peak of the mountain at a shocking speed. 500, 600, 700. Who is that young man? How can he be so talented? I recognize him. I think his name is Yang Bian or Yang Xiao. Previously, at the 10,000 Talents banquet, he defeated Xiang Kun and crippled that genius from the Divine Palace. So it's him. The crowd exclaimed, and their expressions were somewhat complicated. When the white-robed figure left Zhao Bado and Wu Hongshou behind him, there was a burst of noise on the mountain path. It seems that Yang Bian is going to become famous this time. He defeated so many geniuses. Who is this young man? His name is Yang Yuan, not Yang Bian. Just as everyone was discussing in low voices, they saw a figure in a green robe slowly walking over on the mountain path. In the end, he stopped on the 500th stone step. He looked up at the white-robed figure and watched as he walked step by step to the top of the mountain. A heartfelt smile suddenly bloomed on his face. Chapter 1204. Brother Yang, you really didn't disappoint me. Zhang Jiuji clenched his fists and smiled happily. He still had some respect for this senior brother with a terrifying physical body. He dared to love and hate, and he was not afraid of the rich and powerful. However, he was able to let go. When the two of them were fighting for the 3,000 moments of time, it was Yang Yuan who gave up at the critical moment, giving Zhang Jiuji more chances to get the treasure. Such a person was worthy of his heart. But fate made fools of people. Before Zhang Jiuji could develop a touching brotherhood with him, he was killed by a scoundrel and bore the name of a devil. Now, he wanted to go to the Daotian Academy to find the good fortune that Inyu spoke of. Naturally, he didn't dare to expose his identity, to become famous in the azure sky. Once upon a time, this was his dream. If it weren't for this series of accidents, he would be standing at the highest point, overlooking the common people and dominating the world. No one knew of his 100 years of cultivation, but he reached the top in a single day. With Zhang Jiuji's good fortune saint body and his body tempered by divine thunder, The Palace of War's successor was just a slightly bigger stepping stone. Fate made fools of people. Fate made fools of people. Today, he concealed his aura and changed his appearance. He didn't dare to be too ostentatious for fear of attracting unnecessary trouble. The 500th step was enough to enter the Dao Tian Academy. He could only watch as Yang Yuan climbed to the top step by step and left his name in history. Brother Yang, go, bring my glory, and let all the geniuses of the azure sky know that even without a background, you can still become the only one in the world. I'm sorry, Master, Father, I'm sorry, fifth senior sister. I failed to live up to your expectations. Zhang Jiuji slowly closed his eyes. Sorrow flowed around his body, faintly resonating with the heavens and earth. It turned into a breeze, and the sky trembled. At this time, there was a slight fluctuation in his realm. The ancients, they didn't deceive me. Sorrow is power. Finally, when Yang Yuan's figure reached the 799th step, Yuan Tianji's eyes were filled with fighting spirit. He turned his head and looked at the youth beside him. His face was calm, but there was a great momentum around him. What's your name? This was an opponent worth taking seriously. Who would have thought that instead of the young master of the Ling people, such an ordinary-looking young man with no reputation would appear? But this divine Tao simply could not be faked in the slightest. Each step represented a different strength. Since this person was able to make it this far, it proved that his talent was definitely not below his own. Furthermore, even Wu Hongfu, Wu Lei, and the others had stopped at the 730th level and were unable to take another step forward. It seemed that his biggest opponent in this competition was this ordinary-looking young man in white. Ling people's young master? Hee, I gave you time to catch up, but I didn't expect you to be so weak. It was hard to live up to his reputation. My name is... Yang Yuan took a deep breath and his face suddenly lit up. Yang Yuan. Boom! The entire Dao mountain trembled for a moment. Behind the celestial gate at the peak of the mountain, there were already countless figures standing there. Among them, the four hall masters and the geniuses of the four halls all looked at the scene at the foot of the mountain in shock. That's right. This young man's talent and temperament are not bad, and he doesn't seem to be from a prestigious family. When he comes up the mountain, the Dao Academy will invite him to cultivate in the academy. A black-haired, white-robed, middle-aged man with a cold expression nodded indifferently and said in a low voice. The Academy Master's lecture was also an opportunity to recruit a disciple. The Dao Tian Academy taught everyone regardless of their background. As long as one had talent, one could be chosen by the four hall masters and become a disciple of the academy. And this was the terrifying part of the Dao Tian Academy. There were students everywhere, and all of them were disciples. Come on, why is it that every time a genius appears, your Dao Academy has something to do with it? Dao Xinji, why are you so shameless? Beside him, a plainly dressed old man who did not care about his appearance sneered. Without caring about his reputation, he reached out to pick his nose and then flicked it lightly. Zhong Tu, you are a hall master after all. When will you be able to maintain some dignity in front of your disciples? Dao Xinji frowned slightly. His eyes were cold, and there seemed to be Dao patterns in them. What's the use of dignity? My Array Academy is about to lose all its disciples. Who do you want me to maintain my dignity for? It was hard to imagine that such a vulgar and eccentric old man was one of the famous Academy Masters of the Dao Tian Academy. The Array Academy Master, Zhong Tuesday rumor had it that this person was extremely domineering when he was young, and he advocated killing. He had once slaughtered the living beings of an entire world by himself, because the master of that world said that the Tao of Arrays was a heretical path and was not to be feared. In fact, even Dao Xinji, the head of the Dao Academy and the one with the highest cultivation among the four Academy Masters, was very wary of him. The Tao of Arrays was unpredictable. There were often unexpected surprises when fighting with others. Zhong Tu was not only proficient in arrays, but his cultivation was also terrifying. Therefore, even Dao Xinji might not be able to win against him. Moreover, this person had a strange temperament and did not play by the rules. The disciples he taught were all strange and unpredictable. In his words, this was how the Tao of a raise should be. Peerless geniuses were often lunatics. All right, can't the two of you talk less in front of all the disciples? Dao Xinji's Dao was circulating around him, and there was a clear glow above his head. Beside them, another old man in a black robe suddenly sighed softly and shook his head with a bitter smile. His name was Li Rulin. He was the master of the Confucian Academy. He was gentle and did not like to fight. Among the 4 academy masters, except for Dao Xinji, who had broken through to become a venerable and was at the Earth Supreme level, the remaining 3 academy masters were all at the 9th grade saint level. However, the 4 of them were all extremely talented in the 4 paths of Tao, formation, Tao, and Confucianism. Therefore, even utmost exalted level experts did not dare to underestimate the 4 hall masters. Moreover, the 4 of them had many disciples. Offending them was equivalent to offending the Tao faction of Azure. No one dared to try it. Humph, old man Li, it's easy for you to say that. Why don't you give that little disciple called Lu Ming to me? I promise that I'll listen to you in the future. Zhong Tu snorted coldly with a gloomy expression. Compared to Tao, Confucianism, and Buddhism, the Tao of Arrays was a small Tao after all. There were very few talented people. Zhong Tu took in disciples very seriously. He did not want those he did not like, no matter how talented they were. As a result, there were fewer and fewer disciples in the Array Academy in the past 1,000 years. They were at the bottom of the 4 academies. This little disciple of the Confucian Academy, named Lu Ming, had been in the limelight in the academy recently. Not only did he defeat a group of senior brothers and senior sisters at the venerable 5th realm, but he also displayed an extremely terrifying temperament. Such a young man would definitely become the top of the generation in less than 100 years. Moreover, the Confucian Academy had Li Zhichu, who was also benevolent and righteous at a young age. Both of them had the potential to be in the ascendant sequence. It was really enviable. Hearing that, Li Rulin only shook his head and smiled. He did not say anything else and turned to look at the 2 figures standing side by side in the distance. His eyes were filled with relief. Chapter 1205. Senior sister, is that young man in white the young master you mentioned? Behind the immortal gate, Lu Ming and Li Zhichu stood side by side, looking at the immortal Tao. At this moment, he thought that the young master that Li Zhichu fancied must be extremely talented, righteous, and gentle. Although Yuan Tianji was terrifyingly talented and had the aura of a combat emperor, he was not gentle at all. On the other hand, the young man in white was neither arrogant nor rash. He pushed his way to the peak of the immortal Tao. Apart from him, Lu Ming could not see anyone else who had the ability to attract Senior Sister. There was a divine armament on the immortal gate. Only those who had reached the 500th step could be seen. Now, there was a sea of people on the mountain path. Even Li Zhichu could not see the end of it. Only those who were truly outstanding would be able to attract attention. No, Li Zhichu looked lonely. She shook her head slightly and tiptoed, trying to take a closer look. Today, her eyes were bright and she had put on some makeup. Her white clothes were fluttering in the wind, spotless. It was obvious that she had dolled herself up. Her young master had said that he would come to the Daotian Academy. For today, she had specially waited here early in the morning, afraid that she would miss the opportunity to meet him. However, to Li Zhichu's disappointment, her young master did not appear at all. In a vast sea of people, the mountain wind was lonely. Even though there were mountains and forests as companions, it still felt bleak. No. Lu Ming's expression turned cold. He turned to look at Li Zhichu. However, at this moment, he saw a rare trace of melancholy on her beautiful face. For some reason, Lu Ming felt a little depressed at this moment. It was only when Li Zhichu expressed her longing for that young master that Lu Ming realized that Senior Sister's shadow had already been buried in his heart. For the past few days, he had defeated all the talents in the academy, more or less proving himself. Although Lu Ming did not want to admit that he was trapped by worldly feelings, this was an obsession. However, this kind of suppression was like a kind of obsession. The more he wanted to suppress it, the more it surged. It was impossible to suppress it. Therefore, there was nothing that could not change in the feelings in this world. If one was moved, one should not hesitate. Yes, perhaps his injuries were too severe. Li Jichu said inexplicably, her eyes filled with worry. During this period of time, the 4 courtyards strictly ordered their disciples to leave the mountain privately during the academy competition. However, what happened in Dao Heaven City still reached the ears of this first disciple of the Confucian institution. In order to help Gu Chao Ci kill Lord Xiaoyang, he destroyed Wang Yin of the 12 absolutes of the Heavenly Imperial Palace with a single punch during the Wan Jiao banquet. This kind of domineering behavior not only did not make Li Jichu feel annoyed, but when she thought of that flawless immortal face and the gentle smile that often hung at the corner of his mouth, Li Jichu felt her heart tremble, unable to extricate herself. Originally, Li Jichu thought that the young master would be able to suppress all the other geniuses and obtain the supreme honor. However, there were traces of demons in Dao Heaven City, and it was the young master. He fought against the demons alone without fear of death, and in the end, he was almost killed. Young master, you're just like that. Never for oneself, but for the common people. When will you learn how to take care of yourself? Or should I take care of you? Sigh. All of a sudden, Li Jichu felt a sense of desolation in her heart. Looking at the crowd on the mountain path, she felt extremely annoyed. Senior sister? What's wrong? Nothing. Li Jichu shook her head gently and turned to leave. However, at this moment, she heard a series of exclamations from the crowd. Look, it's Master Ling Xiao. It's actually Master Ling Xiao. I heard that the young master is injured. Why is he still so arrogant to step on the divine path? Damn it, isn't this showing that our Daotian Academy is too unreasonable? The young master was injured to kill the demons, but he still wants to participate in the trial personally. I suggest that we quickly send the elders to welcome the young master up the mountain. What? I suspect that you're looking down on the young master. Even if we want to welcome him, it should be the heads of the 4 courtyards coming personally. Only then can it show that our academy values him. The disciples of the 4 courtyards exclaimed and looked furious. However, Li Jichu's face suddenly showed a trace of expectation. She slowly turned around and looked at the mountain path. As expected, she saw a peerless figure in black standing out from the crowd calmly and walking towards the mountain peak. His footsteps were not fast, but he was unusually calm and relaxed. Behind him, 3 celestial figures followed closely. They were half a step behind him like servant girls. Suddenly, Li Jichu's eyes flashed with a trace of disappointment. However, it disappeared in an instant. Li Jichu recognized those 3 people. The Bodhisattva of the extreme west, the Princess of Xianyuan, the Lord of the human race, the Princess of the Golden Crow, born with divine meridians. It could be said that any one of these 3 women was enough to shake the entire Azure continent and be sought after by tens of thousands of people. However, at this moment, they were like servant girls following the footsteps of that young man. They did not dare to take a step forward. Inexplicably, Li Jichu's red lips trembled slightly. Her eyes were filled with vicissitudes. At this moment, she really wanted to be like them and stand behind the young master. Just like this, she wanted to accompany him step by step to the top of the world. Senior sister, what's wrong? Why did her cheeks suddenly become wet? Lu Ming's eyes narrowed slightly. He followed Li Jichu's gaze and looked at the figure on the mountain path. In the next moment, the corner of his eyes suddenly trembled. Right from the beginning, Lu Ming believed that the path of Tao was to walk alone and not have any distractions. Status, appearance, and background could all be said to be fabricated. However, for the first time, as a man, he was shocked by another man's appearance. His celestial appearance was unparalleled and flawless. It was as if he was carved out of the best mutton fat jade. He was unique. Every move, and even a look could cause ripples in one's heart. It was not an exaggeration to use any beautiful words to describe this young man. No wonder. Senior sister's Tao heart was strong, but she was obsessed with a young man. Compared to him, looming only felt inferior and insignificant. He was not worth mentioning. The young master of the Ling people. He did not expect that the gentle young master that senior sister mentioned was actually the famous young master of the Ling people in Qingtsang. It was just that. Although this person was righteous, he was already engaged. Now that he had 3 beauties by his side, what status would senior sister have if she were to follow him? Senior sister, I'm not narrow-minded. As long as you yearn for something, I will give you my blessings. However, you won't be able to get the young master of the Ling people. It's all right. The wind blinded my eyes. Li Jichu smiled sweetly. Her beauty was unparalleled. However, the sorrowful frown between her brows made one feel pity for her for no reason. Young master, you're finally here? Oh, that young man in black is the young master of the Ling people? In front of the immortal gate, the 4 courtyard masters looked surprised. Obviously, they did not expect this young master of the ancient clan to be so popular. It said that a few days ago, it was this young man who fought the demons and saved countless disciples of the clan. However, he was seriously injured and almost died. Dao Xinji nodded indifferently. He has a good temperament. Although the Ling people have a strong foundation, in terms of teaching disciples, our academy is the best. When he comes up the mountain, I plan to nonsense. Is this young master of the Ling people someone you can teach? Today I, Zhong Tu, will say this. When a young master of the Ling people comes up the mountain, I plan to discuss Tao with him. Whoever dares to stop me, I will smash his head. Zhong Tu snorted coldly and glared fiercely at Dao Xinji. His eyes shone brightly and dark lines appeared. Not bad, not bad. He was neither arrogant nor rash. He had a righteous heart. This Ling Xiao was a clear stream among the young masters of the ancient clan. Chapter 1206. On the Divine Path, the voices of the people froze. At this moment, everyone was dumbfounded as they looked at the 4 peerless figures. They watched as they walked step by step toward the peak. Their carefree and unrestrained appearance did not attract much attention at first. However, when the 4 of them reached the 700th step and continued to walk forward at an unhurried pace, the foot of the mountain became absolutely silent, especially the black-clothed figure at the front. The instant he took a step forward, the primordial Taoist rhymes seemed to appear beneath his feet. It was shockingly dazzling. A clear radiance spread 90,000 miles, giving rise to a myriad of phenomena. However, there was not the slightest trace of spiritual might rippling from his body. Even Yaoguang Bodhisattva and Xinyuan Princess had eyes as deep as an ancient well. There was no bitterness in their eyes. It was only when they occasionally looked at the young man in front of them that they seemed to be happy. Beside the 3 of them, Jinhan Er's forehead was gradually covered in sweat. However, she also did not use her spiritual power. Instead, she used her physical body and bloodline to resist the terrifying external power. This is too terrifying. Young Master and the others seemed to be resisting this divine might with their physical bodies. Even though Young Master is seriously injured, it seems that he is not someone ordinary people can compare to. Earlier, I was too narrow-minded. At this moment, on the 899th step, Yuan Huaji's expression gradually turned serious. However, there was no resentment or anger. The opponent he desired should be able to suppress the world and reign supreme. Only then would the path to immortality be dazzling. Those who could be defeated by him would never be his enemy. That was because they were simply unworthy. From the beginning to the end, what Yuan Tianji wanted was someone who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. Even an opponent he needed to look up to. Only then would he be able to maintain his original heart, and his fighting spirit would not decline. Ling Xiao, I will give you time to catch up. You better not disappoint me. Beside him, Yang Yuan turned his head and glanced at the foot of the mountain, where he saw Xia Zhimeng climbing the 500th step with difficulty. A warm smile appeared on his face. In the end, Zhimeng, you are not far away from me. Just watch. Today I will stand at the peak of the world and be filled with glory. Your name will be remembered by the world together with me. It will be immortal. Boom! Suddenly, a golden radiance bloomed around Yang Yuan's body. It was like a scorching sun that illuminated the sky. On the mountain path, there was an uproar. Everyone was dumbfounded as they stared at the young man who was walking toward the 900th step. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. How is this possible? That Yang Yuan actually wanted to challenge the Qing Song sage and entered the 900th divine stair? Inexplicably, a trace of mockery appeared in many people's eyes. In this day and age, anyone really dared to pretend to be impressive. Originally, the fact that a nameless youth could stand shoulder to shoulder with Yuan Tianji had already attracted the envy of countless people. Yet, he made such an arrogant move. Aren't you obviously looking for ridicule? At this moment, Yang Yuan took a step forward, but he didn't put his foot down. Visible spiritual energy ripples spread out from the 900 steps. Strong winds howled as divine might fluctuated. Just a single strand of aura was enough to cause the expressions of countless monstrous geniuses to change. A solemn expression appeared on Yang Yuan's face. Sweat flowed down his face and dripped onto the ancient bluestone path. It was a ghastly sight. In the end, when Yang Yuan's foot landed, the golden radiance around him had already dimmed a little. But before the crowd could be shocked, they saw the young man lift his foot again. This Yang Yuan, where did he come from? Isn't this too terrifying? He actually has the physical talent to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Qing Song sage. What's the use of having a strong physical body? Which sect still specializes in cultivating the physical body? I can kill a 6-stage venerable realm expert with a wave of my hand. Discussions instantly rang out. Everyone looked at the young man who was struggling to move forward with a complicated expression and said sarcastically. In particular, Zhang Jiuji's eyes were filled with a complicated look of bitterness. This was the first time he had stepped into the Academy's divine path. However, he had already seen Yang Yuan's physical strength. That day at the 10,000 Talents banquet, the two of them had fought. Although the young man's golden body was extremely powerful, the one who won in the end was him, Zhang Jiuji. In other words, since Yang Yuan could break through the shackles and become respected by tens of thousands of people, then he, Zhang Jiuji, could do the same. In fact, if he hadn't been framed and reduced to his current state, he would be the one standing at the peak of the mountain and being the focus of the thousands of sects in the Qing Song continent. Zhang Jiuji, sullen, resentful. Even though Zhang Jiuji's Tao heart was tenacious and his saint body was naturally formed, this feeling of only being able to watch others show off was truly unreconciled. Moreover, he was supposed to be the one pretending to be the idiot. As for the ridicule of the people at the foot of the mountain, only when one was outstanding enough would they attract controversy. Otherwise, how many people would pay attention to those trash kneeling at the foot of the mountain? A tall tree attracts the wind, and this immortal path should have been going against the flow, crushing all doubts and ridicule. You should ask your father to buy you a GTR. Why are you still at the foot of the mountain when I'm already at the top? Senior brother Yang Yuan, right now, you carry my hopes and expectations. Oh, on the mountain path, Yuan Tianji frowned slightly as he coldly looked at the white-clothed figure in front of him. Holding the dragon halberd tightly in his hand, he suddenly grinned. Interesting, what an unexpected surprise. This immortal path was truly a magnificent one. Work hard to climb. Only when you are dazzling enough will I be able to obtain greater happiness when I trample you under my feet. Buzz. But, just as everyone was in shock, a buzzing sound suddenly came from the ancient path. Everyone was stunned. When they turned their heads to look, they saw that, unknowingly, the peerless figure in black was already standing beside Yuan Tianji. Even the three women behind him were standing side by side as they stepped onto the 899th ancient step. Lord Ling Xiao. It's the Lord Ling Xiao. Can young master break the shackles of the predecessors and become a new peerless divine being? I don't know. If young master wasn't injured, he should be able to. Unfortunately now Ling Xiao. Yuan Tianji's expression froze as he turned to look at the youth beside him. However, at this moment, his eyes were extremely calm. Even his body did not emit a trace of spiritual power, and he did not even look at him. Then, before everyone could react from their shock, they saw Ling Xiao's footsteps light as he stepped onto the 900th step with a steady pace. Yang Yuan, you can definitely do it. Right now, you are already the center of attention, the only one in this generation. However, you can't stop. You have to prove to everyone that you can go further. Jimeng. Fort Jimeng. On the 900th step, Yang Yuan's heart roared crazily. The golden radiance around his body suddenly brightened. Even his bones and blood organs showed a kind of lustrous jade color. At this moment, all of his attention was on the divine path. He did not pay attention to the black-clothed figure that suddenly walked over to him. Chapter 12:07. Yang Yuan, you can do it. Once you step on it, you will be the only one in the world. Yang Yuan looked up to the sky and shouted. He suddenly clenched his fist. Around him, the aura of the great Tao was revived, and golden light flowed. As the Tao pattern evolved, an immortal shadow seemed to appear from his bones and flesh, revealing endless wonders. But, just as he lifted his foot and tried his best to take a new step, he suddenly heard footsteps beside his ear. Yang Yuan turned his head in a daze until he saw a flawless, immortal face pass by him. She calmly stepped on the stairs and walked towards the peak of the mountain with unhurried steps. For a moment, he only felt that it was ridiculous. How could it be? His jade golden body was an ancient classic, and its power was overwhelming. But even so, it was still extremely difficult for him to walk on this ancient path. Every step was difficult. How could Ling Xiao maintain such calmness? Looking at him, this so-called trial was not even worth mentioning at all. Was it not worth mentioning at all? Pucci. Suddenly, a force even more terrifying than the one before came crashing down on his head. With Yang Yuan's strength, he was already under great pressure from the divine path. Being so distracted, his Tao heart was shaken, and he was crushed and fell directly down the mountain path. Beep! The Son of Destiny's mind is shaken. Congratulations to the host for plundering 2,000 luck points and 20,000 villain points. Hearing the notification from the system, Ling Xiao was not surprised at all. Just now, he deliberately gave Yang Yuan a chance to perform so that he could give him a simple blow when he was the center of attention. This mountain path contained extremely terrifying divine power, and Ling Xiao only slightly released his aura and mixed it with the divine power, and Yang Yuan was directly pushed down the mountain path. However, Zhang Jiuji actually took the initiative to give up the opportunity to show off at this time, which more or less surprised Ling Xiao. It seemed that after experiencing the previous ordeal, this little leak had learned to endure. Did you see that? Ling Xiao, love and care for the heavenly wills. I'm a professional in tempering their Tao hearts and helping them grow. Why aren't you shouting? Roll down. That Yang Yuan is coming down. On the mountain path, cries of surprise could be heard everywhere. However, at this moment, other than the respect they had for Ling Xiao, there was also a hint of mockery in their eyes. Yang Yuan? Pucci, who asked you to be so pretentious? Now your head is almost gone. Are you satisfied now? Everyone looked coldly at the white-robed figure who was tumbling down. They watched as he struggled with all his might, but before he could get up, he was crushed by the enormous force of the ancient paths and fell down. Zhang Jiuji instantly sighed lightly when he saw this scene. He took a step forward, and his figure transformed into an afterimage as he raised his foot and stomped Yang Yuan onto the 600th step. Senior brother Yang Yuan, are you all right? With Zhang Jiuji's strength, he naturally could not see what Ling Xiao had done in secret. Even Yang Yuan only thought that it was because he was distracted, which caused his Tao heart to fluctuate, which led to his current situation. Yang Yuan was stunned when he felt the foot stepping on his head and the force from it. When he raised his head again, he saw the green-robed young man looking at him gently. Yang Yuan struggled fiercely and stood up from the ground. However, the trace of blood at the corner of his mouth and the tattered white robe on his body made him look somewhat miserable. He failed again. Why was it that every time he tried to show off, something unexpected would happen, and he would embarrass himself? Sigh, senior brother, there's no need to be angry. You're already doing very well. Looking at the gloomy young man in front of him, Zhang Juji comforted him softly. However, at this moment, his eyes were also somewhat lonely. He raised his head and looked at the black-robed figure walking on the mountain peak. His heart trembled inexplicably. It seemed like, from the beginning to the end, the young master of the Ling people had been climbing the mountain at the same speed. Originally, he thought that Inu had attacked too heavily and injured Ling Zhao's foundation. However, from the looks of it, even if his injuries had not healed, his talent was also unique in the world. However, why was the word Ling not among the 13 taboos mentioned by Master? However, I wonder if the Western Buddha mentioned by Master has anything to do with this bodhisattva? Yang Yuan snorted coldly and glared at Zhang Juji fiercely. He raised his hand and wiped the footprint on his face. However, he did not continue climbing the mountain. Instead, he walked towards Xia Jiming. Compared to the outstanding talents of the sex on the mountain path, in the entire Azure world, only the young master of the Ling people was better than him. As such, he did not need to prove anything. Inexplicably, a determined face suddenly appeared in Yang Yuan's mind. Brother Jijio, I wonder if you're qualified to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ling Xiao with your talent? At the same time, on the 900th step, Yao Guang's body quietly bloomed with Buddhist light. Then, she also stepped forward and walked forward. Although she had used her spiritual power, she still appeared to be rather calm and did not feel too much pressure. On the other hand, Xinyuan Weiyang's blood qi surged and turned into a sea of blood. Not only did it not have a trace of evil aura, but it also had a majestic and heavy holy aura. Then, she also stepped forward and chased after Ling Xiao. Only Jin Han, Er's face was extremely pale. Even though her body was surrounded by flames, it was still extremely difficult for her to take this step. Time passed, and finally, everyone's figure stopped on a mountain path. Even with the strength of Wu Lei, Wu Hongxi, Shen Jing, and the others, they stopped at the 700th step and could not move forward. Of course, the Divine Tao was a competition of physical strength. They were not good at this and could not be compared to Yu and Tianji. However, it did not mean that they would definitely lose in a fair fight. Everyone had their own strengths and specializations. On the other hand, the young master of the Ling people was rumored to be exceedingly skilled in the sword Tao. They did not expect his physical strength to be so terrifying. Even though Wu Hongxi and the others had already seen him destroy Wang Yin with a single punch, it seemed that they had still underestimated his strength. Lord Ling Xiao, as expected of you, in the entire Azure continent, other than this young master, only the young master of the Realm Lord Palace, Xue Xian, could compete with the Sky Demon. No wonder he had the confidence to kill the demon for the sake of the common people. An invincible physical body and an invincible sword. Among those of the same generation, perhaps only the 10 great sequences could compete with him. Amitabha, on the mountain path in the distance, Yao Guang, dressed in a white robe, put his palms together. Behind him, the shadows of 10,000 Buddhas suddenly appeared. They either sat cross-legged and chanted sutras, or walked in the chaotic world, following Yao Guang's footsteps. However, gradually, even with Yao Guang's azure-glazed body, she could no longer lift her feet. She could only watch as the black-clothed figure walked into the distance until he stood at the peak of the sky. The 940th step was her limit. Xinyuan Weiyang also stopped at the 910th step. Panting, he raised his head and looked forward. A trace of grievance appeared on his pretty face. "Young master, why didn't you wait for me?" The entire mountain path was silent. Jin Han frowned slightly. She felt somewhat lonely in her heart. Now it seemed that her talent was still slightly lacking. Compared to Xinyuan Weiyang, she could not compare to the West Pole Bodhisattva who had already ascended the sequence. Fortunately, her young master's talent was unique in the world. It was impossible for anyone to stand shoulder to shoulder with him. Thinking of this, The disappointment in Jin Han, heart lessened a little. If I can't do it, neither can you. Chapter 1208. Haha. Chaotic times are indeed full of evildoers. In the academy, the 4 academy masters sighed deeply. Originally, this divine path was only the first trial, testing the physical limits of the elites. In the past 10,000 years, only 3 people had reached 900. But now, 4 people had broken the shackles within a breath's time. Moreover, Yaoguang Bodhisattva and the young master of the Ling people were even more terrifying than the crazy barbarian from the extreme south. Such a magnificent feat did not make everyone feel gratified. Instead, it made them feel a little worried. After all, it was only in chaotic times that so many elites and evildoers would suddenly appear to deal with the calamity. However, he didn't know how many of these people would be able to shake the Azure continent in the coming calamity. How many of them would become the stepping stones of others on the path of cultivation? It's a pity that the West Pole Bodhisattva will definitely not enter our academy to cultivate. That young lady with the bloodline should be from the Xianyuan clan. Most likely, she will not stay here for long. That might not be the case. Zhong too smiled inexplicably. There was actually some excitement in his eyes. He heard that these few ladies were following the young master of the Ling people. As long as he could make that lad stay, perhaps they would all stay in the academy. The Array Formation Academy would welcome a great prosperity. This young master of the Ling people is indeed unparalleled in talent. In the crowd, Lu Ming sighed softly. He had always been resilient. But at this moment, when he saw that peerless figure in black walking alone, he still felt a little pressured. Even though he had many trump cards and had never revealed his true strength, but compared to Ling Xiao, he was still somewhat inferior. He was indeed the young man that senior sister fancied. It seemed that there was still a long way to go before he could win back senior sister's heart. Unparalleled in talent, Li Jichu turned her head, somewhat surprised. She glanced at Lu Ming, and the corners of her lips curled into a beautiful arc. No, young master is unparalleled in the world. WH what? Lu Ming's eyes trembled slightly, and his face was gloomy. Unparalleled in the world? Originally, he did not have much enmity toward Ling Xiao. If senior sister had not mentioned it, he would not even have the slightest interaction with such a noble young master of the ancient clan. But inexplicably, she began to want to compete with him, which young man didn't have a bit of pride in their hearts. Furthermore, Lu Ming had never revealed his means in public. Even if the young master of the Ling people had a terrifying physical body, he did not take him seriously. The reason being that he had a precious treasure that could defeat 10,000 enemies. You will know, but junior brother Lu is also very good. There are still 2 days before the final battle of the 4 academies. I believe that junior brother will definitely amaze the world. Li Jichu smiled sweetly, but she never looked at Lu Ming. Across thousands of miles of mountains and seas, there was only one person who caught his eye. On the divine path, Ling Xiao walked with his hands behind his back. His black robes fluttered in the wind, making him look otherworldly and exceptional. At this moment, he could sense that Yao Guang and the others were no longer behind him. It was obvious that their physical strength was no match for his demonic body. It was hard to imagine. Once he fused with the 6 demonic bones and forged the 3,000 sword bones, who in this world would be able to walk shoulder to shoulder with him? Look, who is it? At this moment, there was an earth-shattering commotion on the mountain path again. Everyone looked up and saw a beautiful figure in black robes descending from the sky. Their eyes narrowed fiercely. It was a graceful and unparalleled figure. Her black phoenix robes were outlined with dark golden patterns. Her fine black hair was tied up in a bun with a jade hairpin. It was simple and elegant. Her loose emperor robes fluttered in the wind, revealing her snow-white, slender neck. There was an inexplicable otherworldly charm to her. Her eyes were as clear as autumn water, and she was smart and elegant. That pair of bare feet was fair and tender, as bright as the moon. There was a touch of cold arrogance on her face. She was flawless. It's praising the Empress. Instantly, exclamations filled the air. Regardless of whether it was the proud sons or daughters, there was a strong sense of amazement on their faces. There is a beauty in the immortal phoenix who stands alone in the world. This ancient saying was personally written by Ling Xiao for Gu Chao Ci. It seemed to be affectionate, but it contained a domineering aura that looked down on the world. However, when they saw this peerless celestial figure, everyone felt that it was reasonable and not exaggerated at all. If the young master was not here, there would probably be people cheering and admiring her, unable to control their emotions. Gu Chao Ci's YYDS. Boom. Gu Chao Ci's figure descended from the sky, and there seemed to be a divine figure following under her feet. Then, she took a step and directly landed on the 900th step. She was casual and natural, as if she did not feel any pressure at all. Hiss! Sounds of cold air being sucked in immediately rang out. Everyone's faces were filled with disbelief. Everyone knew that this divine path was covered by divine power, not to mention descending from the sky. Even if she took a step, there would still be the pressure of heaven and earth above the 900th step. Could it be that this empress, who looked weak, also cultivated her physical body? Hearing the exclamations behind him, Ling Zhao's eyes turned cold. He turned around and saw Gu Chao Ci walking over from afar with a cold expression. Her face immediately bloomed with radiance. In the past few days, Gu Chao Ci intentionally or unintentionally avoided him and did not give him a chance to be intimate with her at all. Originally, Ling Xiao thought that with such a temperament, she would most likely not show up for such a trial. After all, Gu Chao Ci was already in the sequence. Moreover, she cultivated the peerless mantra of the mortal world, the Tao of chaos. To her, the Mansion Master's lecture was not very attractive. However, he did not expect that she would still come. She descended from the sky in a domineering manner. Ling Xiao stopped and stood quietly at the peak of the mountain, as if he was waiting. Seeing this scene, the crowd on the mountain path was in an uproar. They watched as the beautiful figure finally stood beside Ling Xiao. Then they gently held each other's hands. Boom! There was no light in heaven and earth, and the sun and moon admired each other. In particular, the two of them were wearing black emperor robes that were inexplicably compatible with each other. It caused the hearts of the various sects and clans to tremble, so much so that their Tao hearts fluctuated, and they felt as if they had nothing left to live for. What a pair of immortal couples! They were both otherworldly and had the same eternal talent. However, their love for each other did not waver, and they supported each other. This divine path was very similar to the immortal path. The higher one went, the more lonely one would be. It was a kind of fortune to have someone to walk side by side with. Suddenly, someone's heart was bleeding, and his expression was dispirited, as if he had fallen into madness. How can this be? Why? Didn't Master say that this great Tao is heartless, and that one must be undistracted to have the opportunity to step onto the peak of the world? But why can Master Ling Xiao and praising the Empress be aroused and be invincible in this generation? This Tao is wrong. The Tao I'm cultivating is wrong. The originally peaceful ancient path instantly fell into chaos. Ling Xiao turned to look at the woman beside him. His gaze was gentle, and he smiled softly. Wife, have you rested well? Humph. Gu Chao Ci snorted coldly, but did not answer. However, this time, she did not withdraw her hand. She allowed Ling Xiao to hold it as they walked towards the peak of the mountain. Ling Xiao, I will walk this path with you until the end, until you stand on the peak of the mountain and give me a peaceful life. I only hope that you can stop and wait like you did today. Don't let me be too far away from you. Beep. The destined woman is determined. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 10,000 luck points and 100,000 villain points. Chapter 1209. What? On the divine path, Jean Han Er's red lips trembled. Her eyes were filled with panic. At this moment, there was no longer a trace of arrogance in her heart. There was only endless shock. Originally, She thought that even if Gu Chao Ci was in the sequence and had extraordinary talent, it was not to the point where she needed to look up to her. However, at this moment, seeing her walk step by step to her master's side, as if she was walking on flat ground, Jin Han finally understood. She had underestimated her master's taste. In the entire Azure continent, in terms of appearance and temperament, Gu Chao Ci was unparalleled. Now, she had proven her talent in front of everyone. It was truly enviable. It also made all the prides of the various sects and clans who yearned for her master realize that her master did not favor her only because of her appearance. It was also because of her strength that was on par with his. Perhaps it was because in the past few months, Ling Zhao's fame had grown and overshadowed Gu Chao Ci's radiance. Now that she thought about it, this immortal Phoenix Empress had been the sequence for hundreds of years. Her name was known throughout the 8 barren lands. Could it be that I can only look up to her? Jin Han shook her head and smiled bitterly. She felt like her entire body was deflated. She felt weak and almost fell down. How could it be? This figure, at this moment among the crowd, Zhang Juji's body was also trembling. He could only feel his heart beating violently. Since the moment Gu Chao Ci appeared, he felt that she was somewhat familiar. Although he had heard of this immortal Phoenix Empress's name countless times, today was the first time he saw her. Inexplicably, her figure gradually overlapped with the peerless, immortal figure in his mind. As a result, there was no difference. The same cold and aloof figure, the same flawless and graceful figure. Even the back of her figure was so similar. At this moment, the only thing Zhang Jiuji could not figure out was why this immortal Phoenix Empress, the fiancée of the Ling people's young master, wanted to kill him and Lei Yun. The 3 of them were not related at all. There was not a trace of hatred between them. If it was really her, wouldn't it be somewhat unreasonable? Could it be that there was really someone who looked so similar in this world? Even their temperament was exactly the same? No, I must find a chance to find out. Buzz. Just as everyone was shocked and envious of the 2 figures walking side by side, Ling Xiao and Gu Chao Ci's footsteps stopped for the first time. 990 steps. This record had already broken the Dao Tian Academy's record since its establishment. In other words, even if the 2 of them stopped now, their names would go down in history and they would be respected by the world. Finally stopped. At this moment, all the geniuses were already numb from the shock of Ling Xiao and Gu Chao Ci's monstrous talents. Both of them had the strength to crush a generation, yet they were so deeply in love with each other. It was hard to imagine how many people in the Azure Sky realm would be a match for them in another 100 years. Furthermore, from the looks of it, 2 more great emperors would be born in the Azure soon. Is my wife tired? Ling Xiao turned around and looked at the woman beside him with raised brows. Gu Chao Ci's chaotic dragon phoenix deity body was indeed more terrifying than the sacred battle bodies in the Azure Sky realm. However, 990 divine steps seemed to be her limit. At this moment, Gu Chao Ci's forehead was covered in sweat. Even the aura around her seemed to have dimmed. Hearing that, Gu Chao Ci shook her head. Her eyes were firm and her peerless face was cold. Let's go. Then, she took a deep breath and lifted her foot. Suddenly, her body was surrounded by a divine aura. Roar, chirp. The wind and clouds in the sky suddenly changed. Thousands of miles of tribulation clouds fell from the sky. The entire mountain of paths fell into the night. Among the layers of clouds, there seemed to be 2 giant figures entrenched. One was a dragon and the other a phoenix. They were alternating with each other. Endless visions flowed out of Gu Chao Ci's body. Sacred mountains, great rivers, azure wood, and purple lightning. There seemed to be the river of time and the collapse of the magnificent palace. The aura of life and death flowed around her body. It was very mysterious. Her figure finally took a step forward and stood on the new flight of stairs. Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled. He could feel Gu Chao Ci's hand suddenly tighten. It was obvious that she had used the chaotic dragon phoenix deity body to the extreme. My wife, do you remember what I said to you? Ling Zhao's tone was calm, and his eyes seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life. Then, under everyone's dumbfounded gaze, he suddenly reached out and pulled Gu Chaosai into his arms. He lifted her up by the waist. Ling Xiao, I said that I won't let you feel a trace of evil in this world. Even the heavens and earth can't bully you. Ling Xiao lowered his head and smiled. However, the decisiveness in his words made Gu Chaosai's body tremble. She was inexplicably touched. Beep. The Lady of Destiny's Tao heart trembled, and she was extremely touched. Congratulations, host, for obtaining 10,000 luck points and 100,000 villain points. Ling Xiao, you and I don't need to talk anymore. I will split the heavens and earth for you. Ling Xiao's eyes glinted with evil. With a thought, he said, System 3,000 sword bones. Add points to forge the will of heaven. Boom! On the divine path, the mountain wind gradually rose. A wisp of biting cold swept through the world like a cold autumn night. Wisps of sword intent wrapped around Ling Xiao's body. It was like a heavenly sword that pierced the clouds. Out of 3,000 sword bones, 500 had been formed. Beep! Congratulations to the host for forging the will of heaven. 60%. A new system function has been unlocked. By killing those who are not destined, the host can plunder their physique and bloodline. Ling Xiao's smile grew wider. He looked down at the shy Gu Chaosai in his arms. Without any hesitation, he lifted his feet and walked towards the last 9 steps. Boom! Boom! The entire Dao Mountain was filled with rolling thunder. Above Ling Xiao's head, endless divine lightning rolled and turned into a sea, trying to stop the young man's footsteps. However, the moment the lightning fell, sword intent shot out from Ling Xiao's body. The 3,000 immortal swords pierced through the sky and cut through everything. From afar, Ling Xiao seemed to be carrying the heavens on his back as he walked alone. That fearless posture inexplicably shocked people. What a terrifying sword intent. What a terrifying young master. This is what it means to be truly invincible. As your sword immortal, there's one more person today. Gradually, everyone's reverence for Ling Xiao no longer had anything to do with his identity or background. That sword aura that could split the heavens and earth and destroy everything, even from a distance, made people tremble in fear. They did not dare to look directly at it. Even Yuan Tianji, who originally wanted to fight against Ling Xiao, was shaken the moment the sword intent cut through the sky. At this moment, he realized that some enemies would make people feel unreal if they stood too far away. That's right. His Tao was to fight. To fight with people, immortals, and heaven. He had to advance courageously. However, looking at the young man who held the Empress in his arms, carried the vast sea on his back, and split the heavens with his sword, he only felt a deep sense of powerlessness. It was a kind of insignificance that could not be seen from afar. Chapter 12:10. Boom! Boom! Divine lightning fell and turned the mountain path into a silver sea. At this moment, everyone could only see the back of that peerless black-clothed figure. Step by step, he climbed to the top of the mountain at an extremely steady speed. At this moment, the eyes of many geniuses were rippling and their Taoist hearts were trembling, not only because of Ling Xiao's strength, but also because of his unwavering love for the Empress. My wife, you don't believe me again. How could a mere mountain path stop my footsteps? Ling Xiao smiled gently and walked calmly. Around him, the great Tao began to awaken. Auspicious signs appeared. His footsteps finally reached the 998th step. He was only one step away from creating a new legend. Ling Xiao, the gate of immortality at the end of this ancient path, is the second trial of the Tao Tian Academy. There is an ancient tablet of immortality in there that can prove the Taoist rhythm of heaven. If you can leave your name on it, you will be respected by everyone and will be protected by the power of will. If you waste too much energy now, Gu Chaosai raised her head and looked at the handsome face that was close to her. She wanted to say something, but stopped. She knew that with Ling Xiao's temper, he would definitely not admit defeat easily. However, the 999th step of the Divine Path was just a method used by the Tao Tian Academy to select the people who wanted to listen to the Tao Tian Academy's teachings. There was no fortune to be gained. However, the ancient tablet of immortality and the sage's wall of illusion that followed were genuine fortunes. They were also the foundation of the academy. Now, Ling Xiao was already seriously injured and had to bear the pressure of two people. If something happened to him, it would directly affect the next two trials. That's right. Ling Xiao's physical body was indeed incomparably strong. She had experienced it recently. That kind of terror almost caused her mind to collapse. However, the ancient tablet of immortality was a competition of one's Taoist rhythm and the sage's wall of illusion. It was also a trial of remarkable skills and techniques. Ling Xiao was only in his early 20s. Compared to those monstrous geniuses who had cultivated for hundreds of years, he was really too young. It's fine. It would be too boring to travel alone at the end of the immortal path. Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled. His eyes were filled with determination. In the next moment, the 10,000 elephants rose around him. Flames covered the sky. Divine lightning broke through the sun. Time and space quietly stagnated. Roar! The dragon's shadow soared into the sky, shattering the tribulation clouds and divine sea. Every scale on it contained a great amount of divinity, and it was vivid and lifelike. At this moment, as if affected by the dragon's might, immortal light also rose around Gu Chaoxiai's body, transforming into a green phoenix image that tore through the void and intertwined with the dragon image. A Taoist rhyme swept across 90,000 miles, causing the sky to tremble. The celestial radiance of the sun bathed the mountain of Tao, creating layers of sacred scenery. As for Ling Xiao, he finally reached the last step and arrived before the gate of immortality. In his arms, Gu Chaoxiai's pretty face was filled with surprise. Her gaze was inexplicable. At this time, she seemed to feel a bloodline power of the same origin flowing from Ling Xiao's body, causing her mind to tremble. He went up. He really went up. No one has ever done it before. Shocked, dumbfounded. At this moment, on a mountain path, the faces of all the geniuses were filled with indescribable loneliness. The human sovereign was in the world, and the emperor's aura had appeared. The figure on the mountain peak suddenly turned into a mark that crushed everyone's heart, and it was impossible to erase it. In fact, even the Tao Tian Academy's 4 Great Hall Masters and many elders had expressions of disbelief in their eyes. Since the establishment of the Tao Tian Academy, no one had ever set foot on the 999th path of immortality. 9 was the number of extremes, and it contained the laws of the great evolution. But now, this young man, who was only in his early 20s, had actually reached the peak of perfection. The young master of the Ling people was indeed qualified to crush his generation. Moreover, from the beginning to the end, this young man did not seem to use his full strength. In other words, the peak of the divine path was not his limit. How ridiculous was this? In the past 100,000 years, although the Azure human race had declined slightly, there were still countless outstanding geniuses. But compared to the young master of the Ling people, they were not even worth mentioning. What sequence talent! What ancient monstrous genius! Now, it seemed that they would all be suppressed by Ling Xiao, and the dark era would be over. The human race was about to welcome a new human sovereign, Ling Xiao. Gu Chaoxiai struggled down and stood beside Ling Xiao. There was an extremely complicated look in her beautiful eyes. He actually did it. Invincible, immortal beauty. This was nothing more than that. Buzz! Just as everyone on the mountain looked up at the two figures side by side on the mountain peak with trembling eyes, golden light suddenly rose from all sides of the ancient path. The divine power dissipated, and the sky was high and the clouds were clear. Ling Xiao and Gu Chaoxiai held hands and stepped into the gate of immortality, disappearing from sight. Amipa, the relationship between the young master and the empress is really enviable. Yao Guang clasped his hands together and sighed softly. Hearing this, Xinyuan Weiyang nodded in a daze. There was undisguised longing on her face. They were walking side by side on the path to immortality, the union of the dragon and the phoenix, everlasting prosperity. The appearance of these two had completely overturned the merciless Tao of immortality, especially the scene of Ling Xiao holding the Empress in his arms and walking forward with difficulty. Countless heaven's favorites were moved to tears. Their hearts could not calm down for a long time. It turns out that the word love is extremely profound. It can also push one's Tao heart forward. This pair of farts is beautiful and easy to eat. Hee, the Arhat's six senses are not pure. From afar, Jean Han walked over slowly with a smile. The despondent look on her face was long gone. Now it seems that in the entire Azure continent, only Gu Chao Ci can walk side by side with the young master. In the end, they can only serve as a foil for the Empress of the Immortal Phoenix. Let's go. It's time for the second test. In the end, Jean Han took a deep breath and walked towards the gate of immortality at the peak of the mountain. Behind her, Xinyuan Weiyang and Yao Guang looked at each other and followed. However, even though the heavenly qi had dissipated, those who failed to reach the 500th step found it difficult to take another step forward. A ray of light turned into an enchantment that blocked off the path and divided the world into two. As for those disciples who failed to pass the trial, a deep sense of loss appeared on their faces, and they were unwilling to leave. But even so, there were still tens of thousands of heaven's favorites who entered the gate of immortality. Buzz! Only when Ling Xiao and the Empress stepped into the gate of immortality did the world before them open up. This place was a square paved with green jade. It was boundless and contained the sky. There were Taoist rhythms that turned into a sea of stars and covered the sky. Around the square, there were layers of heavenly trees and divine plants. The atmosphere was magical. In the middle of the square, there was a heavenly ancient stele quietly. It was crystal clear and enshrouded in Taoist light. Upon closer inspection, there were golden words on the ancient stele. Divine runes appeared, and they were the names of people. Endless Taoist rhythms intertwined and formed a sea. The closer one got to the ancient stele, the more refreshed one felt. There were signs of spiritual energy boiling. Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly. He held Gu Chao Ci's hand and walked to the front of the stele. There were tens of thousands of names on it. At the second position of the ancient stele, a familiar name appeared. Chapter 12:11. Ling Tianlin. Ling Zhao's eyes were clear, but his expression did not change much. He knew long ago that Ling people avoided the world. Before he came to Qingcang, no one had ever walked the earth. But hundreds of years ago, a peerless sword immortal suddenly appeared in Qingcang and stirred up a storm. Then, he disappeared without a trace. Although people did not know his name, they called him the White-Robed Immortal. Obviously, this person should be Ling Tianlin. But what surprised Ling Xiao was that even with Ling Tianlin's talent, he was only ranked second. Above it, there was another name that caught his eye. Jun Hanch. Master. Ling Xiao only turned to look at the entrance when he heard Jean Han's voice. Then, countless people rushed over and made a deafening noise. Yao Guang and Xinyuan Weiyang took the initiative to keep a distance from Ling Xiao, their eyes full of caution. Now, it seemed that Yao Guang was no match for Gu Chao Ci, even though they were both in the same sequence. Given the nature of this empress and her decisiveness in killing, if they unintentionally provoked her, they would probably be turned into a bowl of fresh human meat soup. Only Jean Han walked up to Ling Xiao, and Ling Xiao with a bright face and bowed respectfully. Master, the second trial tests one's Taoist rhyme and spiritual opportunity. Those who can leave their names on this monument are the true prodigies of the human race. Jean Han explained patiently playing the role of a maid. Oh, Ling Zhao's eyebrows twitched as he stared at the top 10 names. Other than Ling Tianlin, The divine martial emperor and the lord of Tianke prefecture were all on it. Also, those who can enter the trial were the younger generation. The strongest one is only in the saint realm. Master and the empress, with your talents, you can leave your names here and be respected by the world. Boom! Just as Jin Han Er's voice fell, a few prodigies from the various clans suddenly made their moves in front of the ancient tablet. They either used their spiritual powers to suppress the ancient tablet or used their powers of Tao laws to envelop it. However, there wasn't even the slightest ripple on the stone tablet, and their names didn't even appear for a moment. Let's give it a try. Ling Xiao nodded indifferently. Behind him, Xinyuan Weiyang and Yao Guang looked at each other before walking towards the ancient monument. Around the two women, Buddhist light and blood qi rose, transforming into divine signs. Then, everyone's eyes were filled with shock when they saw that the originally sparkling and translucent ancient tablet suddenly lit up with a golden glow, while a bloody glow danced about. Yao Guang's and Xinyuan Weiyang's names also rose from the bottom of the monument to the top. In the end, Yao Guang's name stopped at the 30th place, while Xinyuan Weiyang was in the 100th place. As for the two names at the bottom of the monument, they completely dimmed and dissipated, leaving no trace behind. As expected of the Bodhisattva of the West Pole, such talent is unparalleled even in history. Princess Xinyuan isn't bad either. She's in the top 100 of the human race and already has the opportunity to reach the peak of the Supreme Being realm. A commotion broke out. Shen Jingan, Wu Hongxi, and the others also stepped forward, exerting all their strength to send a palm strike towards the ancient tablet. Especially Shen Jingan. The spear around her transformed into a long dragon, shattering the void as it pierced downwards. Buzz, buzz. The ancient tablet buzzed incessantly, and the glow on it alternated. It was just that compared to Yao Guang, their talent was more than a level weaker. Therefore, even if their names were left on the tablet, most of them were in the thousands. Even so, these people were already the top of their generation. Daoist Tianji, why don't we give it a try too? Wu Lei's eyes were filled with longing as he turned to look at Yuan Tianji beside him. The two of them walked side by side and brazenly attacked. Layers of Taoist rhymes surged, crushing the heavens and earth as they crashed onto the tablet. Unfortunately, even though Yuan Tianji was arrogant and considered himself invincible, he was only ranked in the top 7,000. On the other hand, although Wu Lei's physical body was weak, his Taoist rhymes could be considered profound. He actually suppressed Yuan Tianji and was ranked in the top 6,700. Junior sister. Let's give it a try too. Yang Yuan took a deep breath. Although he had suffered some injuries on the divine path just now, how could he let go of such an opportunity to show off so easily? Although Ling Zhao's talent shocked him, Yang Yuan believed that if he was given a little more time to find the reincarnation divine palace, his achievements might not be below this young master of the Ling people. Go ahead. Xia Jiming shook her head. Although her expression was calm, her eyes never left the black-robed figure. Okay. Yang Yuan nodded slightly. He walked to the front of the tablet and took a deep breath. Golden light shone around his body. At first, it was only a wisp, but soon it was as bright as the sun. Furthermore, at this moment, everyone could see that his bones were emitting a jade-like luster through his flesh and blood. Immortal qi lingered around him. He clenched his fist and slowly accumulated power. An oppressive aura suddenly descended, instantly attracting the attention of countless geniuses present. Everyone's attention. At this moment, Yang Yuan only felt his heart surging, and his body was filled with inexhaustible power. Then, he punched out, shattering the void within 100 miles and fiercely imprinted on the tablet. It did not move at all. There wasn't even a trace of profound light that lit up on the ancient tablet. The silence lasted for a moment before it was broken by roars of laughter. Haha, holy shit. Just now, when I saw his posture, I thought that he was going to shatter the ancient heavenly tablet. Why does Yang Yuan like to show off so much? His face still doesn't hurt. Some people always think that they are destined to be the center of attention wherever they go. Buzz. Just as the crowd was bustling with noise, and everyone was looking at the white-clothed youth in front of the stone tablet with ridicule, a strange buzzing sound suddenly rang out in the entire space. Golden light suddenly appeared, and the divine transformation sun rose. At the bottom of the tablet, a wisp of dazzling golden light shot into the sky and rushed toward the top of the tablet at a terrifying speed. Shun Jingan, Wu Hongqiu, Yuan Tianji, and Wu Lei's names were drowned out by that wisp of golden light. Among all the geniuses present, except for Ling Xiao and Gu Chaoxiai, who had yet to make a move, only Yao Guang and Xinyuan Weiyang were above Yang Yuan. Gradually, the rising speed of the golden light quietly slowed down, but it still continued to climb with an indomitable momentum. In the end, Yang Yuan's name appeared in the 109th position. He was only 7 places away from Princess Xinyuan. How is this possible? How can Yang Yuan have such a terrifying Dao mechanism? The crowd was in an uproar. At this moment, many disciples' faces were filled with fear and shock. Just now, Yang Yuan had already proven his physical talent on the divine path. But who would have thought that this ordinary-looking and ordinary young man would also have such talent in Dao mechanism and spiritual aura? Could it be that he already had the strength to contend with the sequence? However, seeing this scene, Ling Zhao's face did not have a trace of surprise. It was normal for the Son of Destiny to counterattack and slap the face. Usually, the more ridicule there was, the more intense the reversal of the plot would be. In Ling Zhao's opinion, the one who should be showing off on the tablet was not Yang Yuan, but Zhang Jiuji. Chapter 12:12. Good Fortune, Saint Body, Dark Tribulation, Divine Lightning. Although Zhang Jiuji's physical body might not be stronger than Yang Yuan's, but in terms of comprehension of the great Dao and spirituality, this little disciple of the Nihility Dao sect definitely couldn't compare to him. After all, the word good fortune was the essence of heaven and earth. Therefore, there was a high chance that this ancient tablet trial was Zhang Jiuji's show of strength. Wife, let's give it a try too. Ling Xiao smiled and ignored everyone's shock. Gu Chaozi nodded. She lifted her foot and stood in front of the tablet. Instantly, the originally noisy square fell into silence. Everyone looked expectantly at the 2 black-clothed figures standing side by side. Their expressions were somewhat complicated. With Gu Chaoxiai and Ling Zhao's talent, they would definitely leave their names on an ancient tablet for future generations to look up to. Their rankings would definitely be above Yao Guang's, but no one knew if they could enter the top 10. One had to know that the names on the ancient tablet didn't include all the peerless geniuses in the Azure world in the past 100,000 years, but to be able to stand in the top 100 of the ancient tablet was a taboo of the same generation. At this moment, Gu Chaoxiai raised her head and looked at the top of the ancient tablet. In the next moment, she suddenly stretched out her hand. Buzz! The roar of a dragon and the cry of a phoenix resounded. In Gu Chaoxiai's palm, there seemed to be thousands of divine runes that shone brightly. Vaguely, on her back, a pair of green phoenix wings stretched for thousands of miles. Every feather on the wings contained supreme divine intent and emitted a terrifying immortal aura. On the ancient tablet, there was a 7-colored radiance that shot into the sky and evolved into thousands of strange phenomena. The entire square was silent. Everyone's eyes trembled as they looked at the auspicious clouds that covered the sky. They looked at Gu Chaoxiai, who was like an ancient empress standing in front of everyone, indifferent and eternal. Especially under the contrast of the phoenix wings, she was like a fallen immortal, ethereal and ethereal, both calm and demonic. 2 different temperaments that shouldn't have appeared at the same time were perfectly fused into one person. At this moment, even the most determined heaven's favorites were stunned by the silhouette of an immortal who was wearing an emperor's robe and had black hair dancing in the wind. Unfortunately, her eyes were always as cold as the night. Only when she looked at the young master would she reveal a trace of smoke. Boom! Finally, When the light from the ancient tablet dissipated, an uproar instantly sounded out. As for Gu Chaoxiai's name, it directly climbed to the top of the Tao monument, only below June Hanch. She was ranked second on the Tao monument in the past 100,000 years. Too scary. The Empress's talent is simply too frightening. It seems like the Empress will step into the true Great Emperor realm sooner or later. Perhaps our human race will have a chance to rise. Praising the Empress, independent from the world. However, at this moment, although Ling Zhao's face showed a trace of surprise, it wasn't because of Gu Chaoxiai's ranking, but because of the name June Hanch. Based on Gu Chaoxiai's providence, it was hard to find anyone in the Azure world who could be compared to her. The Chaos Dragon Phoenix immortal body was a fusion of the Chaos Tao and the true Dragon Phoenix bloodline. Except for Ling Zhao's Sky Demon body, it was hard to find anyone who could be compared to her. Not only did June Hanch suppress Ling Tianlin, but even Gu Chaoxiai couldn't break his ranking. However, this was the first time Ling Xiao heard of this name. Who is he? Second, he's actually the second most talented person in the past 100,000 years. Jin Han Er's red lips trembled, and her eyes were filled with shock. In terms of divine Tao, she still felt that she had a chance to be compared to the Empress Immortal Phoenix. However, at this moment, Jin Han didn't even dare to go to the ancient tablet to verify her Daoji talent. Regardless of whether it was Yao Guang or Xinyuan Weiyang, they were both true geniuses of the Azure world. One was ranked, and the other was the daughter of the human emperor. However, they were both ranked outside the top 30, and Jin Han was probably even lower. Therefore, how could she compare to Gu Chaoxiai? Although the ancient tablet of Tao only recorded the Daoji rankings of those who came to listen to the scripture trial, Gu Chaoxiai's talent was unimaginable to be ranked second on the list of 10,000 in the past 100,000 years. It turned out that there was really a world of difference. Wife, have you heard of the name June Hanch? Ling Xiao raised his head and looked at the beautiful figure in the phoenix robe walking towards him with a gentle smile. Hearing this, Gu Chaoxiai shook her head and said calmly, "This is also the first time I've seen this name. Perhaps it's someone from tens of thousands of years ago." Throughout history, there were indeed countless people with such amazing talents. However, there were only a few who could truly become a great emperor and live forever. The path to immortality was filled with dangers. No matter how monstrous a person was, if they didn't have the protection of luck, they could still die young from natural disasters. Oh, even if he had the protection of providence, it seemed that he would still die. Is that so? Ling Xiao nodded indifferently, but he had some guesses in his heart. June Hanch, did you hear how awesome this name was? Could he be a minor character who had nothing to do with the plot? Boom, 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 around the ancient tablet. One figure after another walked up to the stele and tried their best to occupy a spot on the stele. However, after Gu Chaoxiai made her move, only the young master of the Nangong clan, Nangong Bieha, managed to make it to the top 10,000 with the Nangong clan's secret technique, the Divine Wheel of Heavenly Wood. This was somewhat unexpected. Ling Xiao had seen Nangong clan's young master at the Wanjiao banquet. However, this person did not have any providence and was rather stable, so he did not attract Ling Zhao's attention. However, at this moment, looking at the young man who was full of vitality, Ling Zhao's eyes flashed with a hint of playfulness for the first time. Gradually, the boom disappeared, and everyone's gaze unconsciously landed on Ling Xiao. Obviously, many people wanted to know if this young master's strength compared to the previous monstrous talents, who was stronger and who was weaker. Young master, aren't you going to try? The ranking on this ancient tablet will directly affect the seats to listen to the scripture. Jin Han stood behind Ling Xiao and reminded him softly. Oh, hearing this, Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, he lifted his leg and walked towards the ancient tablet. Even if I give you time to catch up on this path to immortality, those who can see my backbone in the end can also be called emperors in the mortal world. Looking at the figure of the young man who slowly stepped out, Everyone felt suffocated and their eyes were filled with excitement. Young master, can you create another miracle? Until Ling Xiao stopped and looked up at the densely packed and dazzling golden names. There was not a trace of emotion on his face. The human race's genius, who can leave his name and be respected by all. In this world, you only need to respect me, and that's enough. Buzz. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew in the void. It was gentle and unruffled, without any ripples. However, inexplicably, everyone felt a chill rising from the bottom of their feet, as if they had seen something ominous. It was extremely terrifying. Chapter 12-13. Buzz. Ling Xiao stretched out his hand, but there was not a single ripple on his body. His fair and slender palm seemed to be carved out of the finest white jade. It was flawless and sparkling as it gently imprinted itself on the ancient heavenly steel. Unlike the other sky prides who had given their all, rather than saying that Ling Xiao was training, it was more accurate to say that he was touching the ancient heavenly steel in front of him. It was like meeting an old friend. It was so gentle that it caused ripples in the hearts of many sky prides. They could not help but imagine how it would feel to be touched by such a gentle palm. The entire square was dead silent. At that moment, no one doubted that Ling Xiao's name would be in the top 10 of the ancient heavenly steel. They were just curious if this young master was able to suppress Qing Song for 100,000 years and become the strongest. However, the strange thing was that there was not a single ray of light on the ancient heavenly steel. It was as if Lord Ling Xiao had really touched the ancient heavenly steel. Let's go. Until Ling Xiao turned around and walked to Gu Chaoxiai's side, held her hand, and walked toward the end of the square. The sky prides around the ancient heavenly steel were still in a daze. Huh, he's leaving just like that? Everyone looked at each other. Obviously, they did not understand what Ling Xiao was trying to do. But, at that moment, there was a soft shattering sound in the square. Immediately after, some people started to exclaim in shock. Look, the ancient heavenly steel shattered. What? Instantly, the entire square was in an uproar. Countless people stared at the terrifying crack that penetrated from the bottom of the ancient heavenly steel. Other than fear, there was nothing else in their eyes. How could it be? The ancient heavenly steel, the most precious treasure of the academy, could not withstand the Taoist rhyme of the young master's palm. He had not used any strength. How could the ancient heavenly steel shatter? Crack, crack. The originally crystal clear ancient heavenly steel was instantly filled with countless cracks. The golden names engraved on it finally dimmed and disappeared at this moment. Only that peerless figure in black was free and unrestrained. It was as if he didn't notice the movement behind him at all as he led the Empress away. In the crowd, Yang Yuan clenched his fists. His eyes were filled with shock. He only felt that this was ridiculous. We are both made of flesh and blood, but why are you so outstanding? He had a supreme background, a peerless beauty, and a peerless talent. Yet, he had a wife who was as beautiful as a painting. Could it be that the luck of heaven and earth was really on this young master of the Ling people? How did you do it? Gu Chaoxiai turned her head and looked at the calm-looking young man beside her with a confused expression. Suddenly, she seemed to realize that she really didn't recognize this young man. In a short span of 3 years, he had grown from a youth from the lower realm whom she had regarded as an ant to someone whom she had to look up to. The ancient Tao Heaven Tablet had stood for 100,000 years. During this period of time, countless monstrous geniuses had come here to train, but not a single one of them had been able to shake even a corner of him. But today, Ling Xiao had only stretched out his palm. He didn't use any spiritual power, and that ancient tablet had shattered. The true form of the sky demon was actually so terrifying, but he clearly didn't use any of the sky demon's aura just now. How exactly did he do it? Furthermore, in Gu Chaoxiai's opinion, it was extremely difficult for even the sky demon to achieve such a feat in a short span of 3 years. Ling Xiao, what exactly did you experience? What do you mean? How did I do it? Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly. Seeing that Gu Chaoxiai's eyes were gradually turning cold, he smiled faintly and said, I just stretched out my hand to touch that stone tablet. It seemed to be a little afraid of me, and it cracked open on its own. It cracked open on its own. Gu Chaoxiai nodded seriously and didn't ask anything else. Seeing this scene, Ling Xiao's expression turned serious. Then he laughed bitterly. Has it already reached such a stage? She believes everything I say. But why hasn't the system acknowledged me as its master? What is she worried about? Inexplicably, Ling Xiao's eyes flashed with a hint of coldness. However, the smile on his face became gentler. That ancient tablet could indeed differentiate one's talent based on spiritual power. But now, Ling Xiao already had more than 20 types of spiritual power. Moreover, they were all at the perfect realm. In Ling Xiao's opinion, it was absolutely impossible for someone to integrate so many spiritual powers and cultivate them to the perfect realm, let alone in azure heaven. In other words, if Ling Xiao could one day meet a monster like him who had comprehended dozens of spiritual powers in this world, then that person would definitely be a dog who added points to the system. There's only one last trial left, right? Ling Xiao raised his head and looked at the seven-color divine wall standing at the end of his vision. At this moment, he could feel that the wall seemed to contain an extremely mysterious power. It was like an illusion, but it was surging with true killing intent. Yes, Sage illusory wall. Gu Chaosai nodded slightly. Her eyes revealed a rare trace of seriousness. It was very obvious that even with her cultivation talent, she felt a little apprehensive in the face of this trial. Sage illusory wall? It's the classic moves left behind by the geniuses who came here to train in the past. There are even some Tao law origins. As long as you defeat the afterimage, you can obtain the creation within. There are thousands of divine patterns in Gu Chaoxiai's eyes. Her phoenix robe fluttered in the absence of wind. It was obvious that she was prepared for the trial. She didn't care about the techniques and moves. The Emperor Tao Dragon Phoenix Sutra was a supreme classic. It was also compatible with her bloodline. In fact, the Chaos Tao law that she used to seal her child had been completely awakened now. Therefore, she was more concerned about the Tao law power left behind by the human race's ancestors and ancient monsters. Her Chaos Tao law could integrate all things. It was the power closest to the creation realm's origin. Therefore, if she could integrate some of the Tao law power that had accumulated for 100,000 years in the illusory wall, her cultivation would definitely enter the sage realm. Oh, Tao law origins? Ling Xiao's eyes turned cold. Wasn't this a coincidence? What kind of colored wall was this? It was simply a creation specially prepared for him. Could it be that as his destiny casting value increased, he had already begun to enjoy the treatment of a son of destiny? Oh no, this trial should be prepared for Gu Chaoxiai. Ling Xiao raised his head and looked at the ancient wall in front of him. Distinctionless education? At this moment, he very easily understood why the human race's monsters were willing to put a wisp of Tao law power into the illusory wall. Given the Daotian Academy's status in Qing Song, it was not an exaggeration to say that it was the human race's sacred ground. Moreover, those who could come here to train were mostly people who admired the Daotian Academy's master. As long as the old man spoke with emotion and reason and put a hat of righteousness on the human race's monstrous geniuses, there would definitely be people who would be willing to take the initiative to contribute their strength. However, inexplicably, Ling Xiao suddenly felt that the Daotian Academy's master strategy was far from as simple as he had imagined. It was obvious that he had put in so much effort to preach the scriptures for the trial. Perhaps it wasn't as simple as the world thought. In the struggle of the immortal path, one had to redeem oneself in order to redeem others. A heavenly supreme who had yet to step foot on the peak of the world and didn't want to enter the arch realm was taking on the responsibility of a human race all day long? Was this reasonable? Chapter 12:14. Ling Xiao. There are countless human experts' images in the Wall of Illusion. Also, I heard that although these images do not have consciousness, the wall of illusion is full of spiritual aura. Therefore, no one knows what kind of monsters are hidden in it. So, Gu Chaoxiai wanted to say something but stopped. Before she finished speaking, she laughed self-mockingly. Given Ling Zhao's strength, since he could destroy the ancient Tao tablet, these images could not threaten him at all. My wife, are you concerned about me? Ling Xiao smiled faintly, but there was not a trace of emotion in her eyes. At this moment, he suddenly had some guesses. Gu Chaoxiai was clearly in love, but she was still unwilling to submit. It seemed that the worries in her heart were too deep. Could it be the power of the Tao laws in the wall of illusion is the most precious creation among the three trials? Only those who have left their names on the ancient Tao tablet can enter. Let's go and fight for more. Gu Chaoxiai ignored Ling Zhao's teasing and walked into the wall of illusion first. Ling Xiao looked coldly at the beautiful figure in front of him. In the end, he did not hesitate and walked into the wall of illusion. Ling Xiao did not have much interest in these so-called remnants of the human race's monstrous talents. The only thing he was curious about was the first place on the Tao tablet called Jun Hanch. He did not know if this person had left his image in the wall. What was his identity? To be able to suppress Gu Chaoxiai. This person's talent was imaginable. However, he did not know how much luck he had. Buzz. When Ling Zhao's figure appeared in the wall of illusion, he saw a towering ancient mountain. The ancient mountain was majestic and fog surged. The vegetation was flourishing, and there were layers of immortal aura. Spiritual radiance sprinkled on it, condensing into colorful Tao laws of order. However, the most frightening thing was that on the 9 perfectly straight mountain paths around the ancient mountain, there were numerous figures standing quietly like statues, emitting an aura that caused one's heart to palpitate. This place was like an independent sect, and the spiritual shadow in the mountain was probably the evildoer's shadow that Gu Chaoxiai mentioned. Did you notice that this mountain is somewhat similar to the ancient Tao Heaven Tablet from before? Ling Xiao raised his head and looked at the top of the ancient mountain. His eyes suddenly surged with fighting spirit. For 100,000 years, although there were no changes to the azure sky, monstrous geniuses still emerged in large numbers. However, in an era, there could only be one ultimate powerhouse. Now that the top figures of each era had gathered here, it inexplicably gave people the urge to compete. If that's the case, the strength of the mountain mirage is also related to the position one is standing on. Gu Chaoxiai nodded slightly and turned to Ling Xiao. There are 9 battle paths here. Ling Xiao, choose one. My wife doesn't intend to be with me. Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly, but Gu Chaoxiai shook her head gently. No, at this moment, she was not conceited. Her talent was indeed enough to dominate all of eternity. However, on each mountain path, there were at least 1,000 famous evildoers standing tall. These people had all stunned the world for a period of time in the past 100,000 years. Therefore, even Gu Chaoxiai could not suppress the entire mountain path with her own strength. However, she did not come here just to see Ling Xiao. She was not here to sightsee. Now that her cultivation level had fallen and she was trapped in the honorable realm, the shackles could not be broken by ordinary spiritual pills and spiritual materials. The Tao law and immortal rhythm in these spiritual shadows was a great supplement for the chaos that she cultivated. This was an opportunity. If she was lucky, she could enter the Sage Realm again. In the Azure Sky sect, the Sage Realm was already the cornerstone of the sect. If the Honorable Realm did not appear, the Sage Realm was the highest. Originally, after using the Chaos Great Tao to seal the Bloodbone, Gu Chaoxiai thought that it would be difficult for her to break out of this realm and return to the peak in this lifetime. However, now it seemed that all these worries were broken after Ling Xiao ascended to the upper realm and her Tao heart stabilized. Indeed, in this immortal path, the Tao heart was the most important. Then be careful. Ling Xiao nodded indifferently. He had never worried about Gu Chaoxiai's safety. Even if Ling Xiao wanted to kill her, With 100,000 Providence points, it would take a lot of effort. As for the dead objects on the mountain path, they were just stepping stones. Buzz. However, just as the two of them each chose a mountain path and were about to start this journey of rebellion, a buzzing sound suddenly came from the distant space. Immediately after, the Azure Sky sect evildoers who left their names on the ancient tablet appeared one after another. Even Yaoguang and Xianyuan Weiyang appeared at the entrance of the illusory wall and looked at the ancient mountain in front of them in shock. Are these the so-called remnants of the ancient sage? As long as they are still alive, I'm afraid they are all overlords now. The Daotian Academy is indeed the sacred land of the human race. As long as one is talented enough, they can cultivate and integrate the cultivation methods and Dao laws of these ancient sages to strengthen the future generations. That's right. The Daotian Academy's way of doing things is the true righteousness of the human race. What are you waiting for? Let's give it a try. Compared to Wu Hongxi, Shen Jing, and the others, Yuan Tianji and Wu Lei were undoubtedly more excited. Of these two, one was a warrior. Wherever he went, there would be a battlefield. Now that he was facing so many ancient evildoers, he could no longer suppress the throbbing in his heart and strode forward with his halberd. As for Wu Lei, needless to say, his divine body cultivated the Tao of integration. He only needed to observe the cultivation methods used by these remnants. There was no need to defeat them. It was already a great opportunity. With that thought in mind, Wu Lei did not choose a battle path. Instead, he followed behind Yuan Tianji and walked toward one of the paths. Arhot, shall we give it a try? Xianyuan Weiyang raised her head and looked at the two figures who had already walked to the foot of the mountain peak. Her eyes were inexplicably deep. Amitabha, this little monk cultivates Buddha's karma. These remnants were created by enlightened masters and have many implications. As such, it's better not to touch them. Yaoguang shook her head. She had come here purely to witness the Azure Feast. As for the Academy Lord's lecture and the Myriad Talents Feast, they were not attractive to her. Although this sage, illusionary wall contained a great opportunity, it was still a great opportunity. However, opportunities were causes and consequences. As for whether they were good or evil, they were ultimately implicated. All right, then I'll give it a try. Xianyuan Weiyang nodded slightly, a rare trace of seriousness appearing on her pretty face. What she lacked now was not talent or cultivation, but the true tempering of life and death. Although there were experts from the Daotian Academy guarding the wall of illusion, there was no danger to her life. However, those remnants were all emotionless killing machines. It was a challenge. Unknowingly, this human princess's temperament seemed to have changed. The path to immortality was full of waves. Who would be willing to settle down? Eldest princess, Jing, and if you want to go, then go. I won't go for this kind of fighting and killing. Cough, cough. Wu Hongxi coughed twice. Seeing Shen Jing and nod silently and leave with her spear, she lifted her foot and walked toward Yaoguang. A smile suddenly appeared on her pretty face. Yaoguang Arhut, Amitabha, eldest princess. Yaoguang's eyes were emotionless. No one could tell whether he was happy or angry. I didn't expect that Yaoguang, Arhut, would come to such a noisy place. Wu Hongxi smiled gently. She did not care about Yaoguang's indifference. Her beautiful eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of deep meaning. I wonder if you have time to come to my martial emperor's city after this trip? Chapter 12:15. Amitabha. The cause and effect of this trip are unknown. Please forgive me for not agreeing to your request, princess. Yaoguang shook his head slightly. From the moment he saw Wu Hongxi, he had sensed a faint trace of evil from her. However, this evil aura did not come from her bloodline. It was more like it was planted by someone else. The eldest princess of the Shenwu dynasty was extremely talented and had a powerful cultivation. However, she was plagued by a strange illness that could not be cured. It was obvious that there was something fishy about this. However, the more it was like this, the more serious the cause and effect of this woman was. Once she was involved, it was unknown whether it would be a blessing or a curse. There's no hurry. I'll invite you after the trip to the academy is over. Wu Hongxi was not in a hurry. She bowed calmly and turned to look at the black-clothed figure at the foot of the mountain in the distance. According to her observation, Yao Guang seemed to have an extremely close relationship with the young master of the Ling people for some reason. Even before coming to Heaven Path City, she already knew that the two of them had been inseparable recently. Given Master Ling Zhao's hatred for evil spirits, perhaps she could ask him to come to Martial Emperor City with the Arhut as a guest. This way, the crisis would be resolved. Boom! Just as Wu Hongxi was pondering, Gu Chaoxiai, Yuan Tianji, Yang Yuan, Shun Jing'an, and the others stepped forward at the same time and walked up the mountain. Suddenly, the sky was filled with multicolored light and divine light. The entire illusory space was rippled by waves of spiritual power and emitted a blinding brilliance. At first, everyone's footsteps were still light and relaxed. They suppressed the illusions along the way and displayed supreme elegance. However, the more they fought, the faster their spiritual power was depleted. Even with Yuan Tianji and Shun Jing and strength, they were unable to defeat the 10th illusion. They were all blocked and forced to retreat. I don't believe that Yuan Tianji, can't even defeat a single illusion. To be honest, the successive blows had already shaken the War Emperor's heart. After all, Ling Xiao and Gu Chaoxiai's talents were too terrifying. It was like a huge mountain with no walls on all sides and was difficult to surmount. Even if Yuan Tianji had cultivated the Tao of invincibility for 300 years, it was nothing more than a joke in front of the two of them. Furthermore, even Yang Yuan, this nameless person who popped out of nowhere, actually crushed him in all aspects. This anger, Yuan Tianji truly found it hard to swallow. Boom! Just as Yuan Tianji was feeling furious, an illusory figure holding an ancient sword silently floated in front of him. The ancient sword was 3 feet long, overflowing with spiritual might as it brazenly slashed out. A strand of surging sword insight that was visible to the eye descended with a bang, and it was like a curtain of rain that formed boundless Tao insights. Yuan Tianji narrowed his eyes and hurriedly raised the black halberd in his hand, wanting to block the sword intent. However, the moment the dragon halberd collided with the sword intent, Yuan Tianji's expression suddenly froze. At this moment, he only felt a vast sword intent surging like the waves of the sea. Even with his celestial combat body, he could not withstand the sword momentum and was instantly sent flying backward, spitting out blood. Overlapping waves, sword technique. 10,000 seas returned to one. But before his figure landed on the ground, the spirit shadow soared into the sky again, surrounded by sword insight that turned into an endless sea and covered the sky, wanting to completely annihilate him. Damn it! Yuan Tianji's expression changed greatly, and for the first time, panic appeared in his eyes. Then, a battle radiance seemed to light up around him, turning into an ancient battle shadow out of thin air. With a momentum that could trample the sky, it blocked the sea of swords above his head. Above the battle shadow, a domineering aura of the great Tao awakened, despising the universe and looking down on heaven and earth. Boom! The sword radiance fell, and thousands of sword insights bloomed from the sky. Every strand of them could easily pierce through the sky. In the end, Yuan Tianji's figure fell under the battle path under everyone's dumbfounded gazes. At this moment, the spirit shadow that was originally standing in the sky suddenly seemed to have come to a standstill. It landed on a mountain path again, motionless like a statue. Uffed! A trace of blood flowed from the corner of Yuan Tianji's mouth, and his eyes trembled as he looked into the distance. At this moment, he could feel that as the battle shadow shattered, his body had been filled with sword intent. If it wasn't for his innate battle physique, this sword strike would have been enough to break his meridians. How is this possible? At this moment, Yuan Tianji finally felt a trace of powerlessness. It was as if his invincible battle path had come to an end. especially Ling Zhao's existence. It had caused an irreparable crack to appear in his originally flawless Dao heart. At the same time, Shun Jing'an's figure was also sent flying by a spirit shadow. The silver spear in his hand fell, and the blood energy around his body seemed to have dissipated. Only Yang Yuan, Xin Yuan Weiyang, and Gu Chao Ci were still surrounded by spirit radiance, which turned into golden radiance, blood sea, and dragon phoenix sacred might. They fought all the way, defeating hundreds of spirit shadows in a row, and were in the limelight. What was Master Ling Xiao doing? At the entrance of the illusory wall, Wu Hongxi suddenly exclaimed, instantly attracting everyone's attention. In front of the battle path, Ling Zhao's figure never took a step forward. Instead, he coldly looked at Yuan Tianji and Shun Jing'an's defeat, and the corner of his mouth suddenly raised into a faint smile. At this moment, he could feel that the battle strength of these spirit shadows was mainly focused on offense. In other words, their defense was basically negligible. Whether it was Shun Jing'an or Yuan Tianji, they both gave their opponents a chance to attack before they were defeated. With that thought, Ling Xiao suddenly took a step forward, and there seemed to be lightning winding around his body. In the illusory wall, a violent wind suddenly blew, and black clouds gathered. And that peerless black-clothed figure turned into an afterimage and rushed toward the top of the battle path. Instantly, on the mountain path, countless spirit shadows woke up from their slumber. Monstrous chi began to recover, and they turned to chase after that streak of flowing light. Boom! In the void, multicolored light, wantonly. All kinds of laws and orders intertwined into chains like an invisible net, imprisoning heaven and earth and reversing yin and yang. Thousands of human clans' spirit shadows woke up at the same time. Just their might alone was enough to shake the heavens and earth. Moreover, these people were the real elites ranked on the ancient Dao Heaven Tablet. Thousands of people fighting at the same time was shocking. In the academy, when the 4 hall masters and countless disciples saw this scene, their faces were filled with intense shock. Obviously, they couldn't understand what the young master of the Ling people, who had an ancient talent and shattered the ancient Dao Heaven Tablet, wanted to do. Until Ling Zhao's figure stood at the top of the battle path, and his eyes narrowed when he saw the spirit shadow standing at the top of the mountain. At this moment, he could feel that the spirit shadow seemed to contain a wisp of void energy. It was ethereal and unpredictable, but also eternal and indestructible. Moreover, unlike the other spiritual clones, this battle shadow's eyes were closed the entire time and did not change at all because of Ouyangming's appearance. Ling Xiao frowned slightly, and he felt a trace of danger in his heart. Boom! Chapter 12:16. Buzz! The sound of a sword suddenly resounded between heaven and earth. Above the void, Ling Xiao held the sword in one hand and placed the other behind his back. His black robe was peerless, and he looked like an immortal. At this moment, there was no trace of emotion on his face. He was cold, calm, and gentle like jade. Even though the thousands of spiritual shadows had already arrived in front of him, he was still calm and unmoved. Then, he raised the long sword in his hand and gently slashed it down. Around him, endless sword radiance began to bloom, and layers of golden lotuses of the great path opened and closed. Suddenly, cold wind blew in all directions within the illusory wall. It was as cold as winter. The whole world seemed to have frozen for a moment. Even the spiritual shadows on the other 8 battle paths stopped at this moment. Everything was silent, and there was no sound. Clang! Then an astonishing sword intent floated in the air. Ling Zhao's body seemed to be flickering with immortal light. His entire arm that was holding the sword turned jade-like at this moment, revealing a supreme divinity. Suddenly, a sea of blood floated in the void, and corpses piled up. Everyone only saw a wisp of clear radiance passing by leisurely and turning into 3,000 sword intents. With an unparalleled momentum, it enveloped the thousands of spiritual shadows. Woo woo woo. A strange whimpering sound that seemed to penetrate through the ages resounded. In front of everyone's eyes, many immortal shadows appeared in the air. They were densely packed and gathered to form a long river of time, from their rise to their destruction. The emotions that were full of resentment and unwillingness inexplicably imprisoned heaven and earth, turning it into a tribulation intent. Unparalleled Tao resentment. This move was originally created by the Sky Demon when he was slaughtering the rebels. It could kill thousands of living beings with one slash, and it was also the strongest move that Ling Xiao had mastered. Although at this moment he used the 3,000 fleeting moments to slash out this move, and it was more or less vast and mighty, but a group of spiritual shadows without spiritual intelligence. Even if they retained some of the power they had when they were alive, how could they resist the ancient resentment in this move? Buzz! The sword radiance pierced through the firmament like the first strand of immortal radiance in the depths of the primordial chaos. It destroyed heaven and earth, yin and yang, and the 6 paths of heaven and earth. At the same time, the fearless thousands of spiritual shadows that were still charging towards Ling Xiao were destroyed as well. Infinite slaughter. Boom boom. The thunderous sound of the great Tao reverberated throughout the 9 heavens. However, what shocked everyone was not the scene of the sword slaying 1,000 spirits. Instead, it was the calm and elegant figure in the void who kept his sword with his hands behind his back. There was still no change in his expression. His black robes fluttered in the wind, and his ink-black hair was tied up in a crown. It was a kind of otherworldly, immortal aura. In front of him, layers of spiritual shadows shattered soundlessly and transformed into boundless spiritual radiance that covered the sky and the sun. In the space where the sword intent slashed through, countless phenomena rose and fell one after another. There were divine mountains collapsing, seas turning into mulberry fields, stars falling from the sky, and immortals being beheaded. Vaguely, it was like a painting of the cycle of epics slowly unfurling before silently dispersing, until the last spiritual shadow on the battle path quietly shattered. The spirit-sourced Taoist rhyme that was scattered in the void suddenly turned into a beam of divine light, enveloping Ling Xiao's figure. At this moment, the young man's body was surrounded by 7-colored light. It made his already flawless face look even more handsome and charming. This is the legendary appearance of a perfected immortal. Although everyone knew about the legend of a perfected immortal, no one had ever seen a perfected immortal's charm with their own eyes. Ever since the Realm Lord used the immortal demon Ancient Bell to suppress Qin Song, all the sects had been silently accumulating power. There had been no turmoil for 100,000 years. However, at this moment, looking at the young man in the void, there was only respect in everyone's hearts. Even people of destiny like Yang Yuan and Lu Ming felt deeply powerless. They did not even dare to have a trace of ambition to compete with him. However, just as everyone was shocked and their eyes were filled with fear, Ling Xiao's expression did not relax at all. Instead, it became even more serious. He lowered his head and looked at the peak of the battle path. For the first time, there was a hint of seriousness in his eyes. At this moment, he could see that the only figure on the battle path had slowly opened his eyes. What was different from the other spiritual shadows was that this pair of eyes contained a wisp of extreme fighting spirit. Jun Hanch. Although Ling Xiao had already guessed his identity, he was still shocked by the fighting spirit that this person exuded. It was a kind of terrifying fighting spirit that was immortal with heaven and earth. He stood there like an ancient god of war, giving people an inexplicable sense of oppression. However, this was just a remnant image, or rather, it was formed by a wisp of divine consciousness. Ling Xiao frowned slightly. He was even more curious about the identity of the person who ranked first on the ancient tablet. Who exactly was he? Why did even the sage realm Ling people, whose divine soul and memories were devoured by him, not know this name? Mysterious, powerful. Inexplicably, Ling Xiao felt a trace of unprecedented pressure. Even if he was able to look down on his peers in Qing Tsang and even the masters of the immortal forces, given Ling Xiao's current means, he might not be unable to contend with them. However, this battle figure made him feel a faint sense of oppression. It was as if he was an old enemy. He did not enter the sequence and did not leave behind a great reputation. However, he suppressed thousands of talents and dominated the past and present. For a moment, Ling Xiao even suspected that this person might be related to the Realm Lord. After all, a monster that could suppress Gu Chao Ci in terms of talent must be a truly terrifying existence in this world. However, with the identity of the Realm Lord, why would he leave his name here? Just as Ling Xiao was deep in thought, an ancient and domineering aura suddenly shot up from the peak of the battle path. It was a kind of domineering aura that dominated the world. In front of this aura, even Ling Xiao felt a trace of insignificance. This feeling was rare for the latter. After all, ever since Ling Xiao ascended to the upper realm, he had dominated the world. No one in the same realm as him could hurt him. Even Xue Xian, the young lord of the Realm Lord Palace and the current sequence, if not for the protection of the immortal devil Ancient Bell, he would not be Ling Xiao's opponent. However, this spirit shadow, a mere spirit shadow, was able to make him feel pressured. Boom! Before Ling Xiao could react, divine light flashed in front of him. The spiritual image swept out like a ghost, instantly piercing through the sky and appearing in front of him. In an instant, space froze and time stopped. Ling Xiao could no longer hear any sound in his ears. Only the ear-piercing screech of space was left. At this moment, he could see that the spiritual image's eyes were extremely deep and cold, like a cold river in the nine heavens, exuding extreme indifference. Around him, a strange and desolate aura circulated, forming a world of its own and enveloping an area of 100 feet. Under this aura, even Ling Xiao felt that his body and bloodline were showing signs of drying up. "Who exactly are you?" Ling Xiao said indifferently. Immortal light surged around him as spiritual fire and lightning alternated. A vast power of stars spread out, and a rich aura of life rose to the peak, trying to stop the strange aura. The entire space shook violently, shattering like ice crystals. The two invincible youths attacked at the same time. Even the illusory space seemed to be unable to withstand the pressure. It shook and wailed and could collapse at any time. Boom! Chapter 12:17. Die! The spiritual shadow spat out a simple word. As for his attack, it was extremely simple. With a single punch, 10,000 mammoths were destroyed. Even though Ling Xiao's physical body was comparable to a prime being's, his eyes flashed with surprise when he saw the spiritual shadow's fist shattering the void. This punch was enough to shatter the heavens, crack the earth, and destroy everything. Ling Xiao's eyes were clear as he slashed down with his sword. The monstrous sword essence instantly fluctuated like a falling galaxy, dazzling and dazzling. Boom! Boom! The two attacks contained extremely terrifying, true meaning of the Great Tao. The moment they collided, the entire Battle Mountain Ancient Road was instantly destroyed. The countless spiritual shadows that were originally standing on top of it all collapsed at the same time, turning into spiritual light Taoist rhymes that covered the entire area. Oh no! Run! However, even though the creation was right in front of them, Yang Yuan, Shan Jing, and the others' expressions changed drastically when they felt the destructive aura surging in the void. Immediately, they no longer cared about the creation divine armaments and frantically fled toward the entrance of the Wall of Illusion. Amiba, Yao Guang's eyes shone with golden light as thousands of Buddhas worshipped behind him. However, just as she was about to walk toward Ling Xiao, a low and gentle voice suddenly sounded in her ears. "You guys leave this place first." Hearing this, Yao Guang's expression turned serious, and his Buddhist nature quietly disappeared. Without any hesitation, he turned and left with Xianyuan Weiyang, who was rushing over from afar. Yao Guang, young master asked us to leave first. Yao Guang turned her head and took a deep look at the two figures standing in the sky with matchless divine might. In the end, she sighed softly and disappeared from where she stood with Xianyuan Weiyang. Only Gu Chao Ci frowned slightly. Looking at the turbulent sea of Taoist rhymes and immortal opportunities above her head, her eyes trembled, but she did not flee in panic like the others. Since Ling Xiao was here, she would not go anywhere. No matter if it was dangerous or safe, she would not leave, and she hoped that he would not abandon her. With that thought in mind, Gu Chao Ci actually sat down cross-legged on the spot. Clear radiance blossomed from her body, transforming into a pair of phoenix wings that covered the sky. The might of a dragon was vast and mighty. Then, she waved her jade-like hand and directly captured the spirit sea above her head, enveloping her. Boom, boom, boom. The wind and clouds within 10,000 miles suddenly changed, and an invisible great Tao opportunity fell from the sky. 7 colored rays of light shot up into the sky from the depths of the illusory wall, and the sound of Tao resounded. The celestial sound was vast and endless. Around Gu Chao Ci, many mysterious phenomena started to appear. Divine Palace, epic starry sea. A tall mountain loomed over the horizon, and purple lightning poured down like a curtain. With the wings of the true dragon and immortal phoenix, he could soar millions of miles into the sky. Green lotuses broke through the soil, and the flowers withered. Within a radius of 10,000 miles, the will of life and the will of death rose alternately. The originally shattered illusory world suddenly became still after everyone left. Then, at the peak of the sky, a giant sun appeared out of nowhere, shining with golden light. At the end of the earth, a crescent moon slowly rose from the east. It was flawless, bright, and eternal. Between heaven and earth, endless Tao, intent, evolved and intertwined, and the shackles of order were shattered. Only the beautiful figure in the phoenix robe, sitting cross-legged at the peak of the mountain, was calm and indifferent, and her eyes were closed. At this moment, the great rhythm of heaven and earth was on Gu Chao Ci alone. In the void, Ling Xiao and the spiritual figure faced each other from afar. At this moment, neither of them was in a hurry to attack, but their eyes were filled with a strong fighting spirit. Ling Xiao lowered his head and glanced at the mountain peak where Gu Chao Ci was, and raised his eyebrows slightly. At this moment, he could feel that the aura on this woman's body was becoming more and more terrifying. It was like a vast blue sea, and the waves were endless, making people feel small and insignificant. But, my wife, is it appropriate for you to hide at the foot of the mountain and eat alone while I fight to the death here? However, the golden providence above Gu Chao Ci's head made Ling Xiao feel a little better. You play with the Tao, and I play with you. Is this called comprehending deeply? The reason why the chaotic Tao law was ranked at the peak of the great Tao was that this Tao law originally had the terrifying power to evolve all things in the world. From the blue sky and bright sun to the vitality of plants and trees. Yin and yang, heaven and earth, life and death, and even the 8 desolates in 4 directions, and the epic of time could all be born from the chaos. Thus, the peak of the great Tao was to form its own universe, be immortal, and control the power of the 6 paths. It was obvious that with Gu Chao Ci's providence, she would step into the arch realm or even the immortal realm sooner or later. At that time, she would be able to create heaven and earth and destroy all things in the world with a single thought. Just thinking about this kind of power made one feel a little excited and want to drink a few cups with her and then have a deep discussion about the friendship between Guan and Bao. What? Wife, are you suspecting that I tampered with the wine again? All right, this time, I'll drink first. What's going on? Why can't I see the space in the illusion wall? It seems to be covered by a wave of divine power. In the academy, the expressions of all the Academy disciples changed drastically. Their eyes were filled with intense shock. Especially at this moment, the flawless rainbow divine light that filled the illusion wall contained an indescribable divine nature. It actually made many supremacy disciples understand, and their cultivation levels fluctuated. They almost broke through on the spot. The 4 Academy Masters' faces were also filled with shock. Even with their cultivation levels, they could not see the scene in the illusion wall at all. However, this rainbow divine light contained the aura of the peak of the great Tao. It could create and destroy all things. Is this the aura of the chaotic Tao? Li Rulin, the Academy Master's eyes trembled. Even his tone was inexplicably solemn. It's really a heavenly talent. I just don't know. Who is the one who released this aura? I didn't expect so many monstrous people to appear in the Dao Tian Academy in succession during the Academy Master's lecture this time. It's a pity that the ancient Dao tablet is broken and the illusion wall is sealed. Our Academy has lost 2 great divine items in succession. There will be no more tablet trial in the Azure Sky Academy. However, the Academy Master should be happy. After all, the original intention of this trial is to help the human race prosper. Now that a heavenly talent has appeared, the human race has finally ushered in the best opportunity in the past 100,000 years. Buzz. Just as everyone in the Academy was discussing animatedly, Ling Xiao looked indifferently at Gu Chao Ci. In front of him, divine light bloomed around the spiritual figure's body again. Then, it threw out a simple punch again. A pitch-black and deep color lingered around the fist's shadow. It was a desolate aura that made one's heart palpitate. At this moment, Ling Xiao only felt that the desolate aura swept over again. It encompassed the universe and intimidated the surroundings. This feeling was similar to the Buddha domain that Zhang Jiuji had used back then. However, the terrifying gravity of the Buddha domain could be resisted with one's physical body. However, the aura of the spiritual figure in front of him was difficult to resist. Even though Ling Xiao's body was flourishing with myriad Dao, he still felt that his spiritual power and blood qi were declining at an extremely slow speed. In fact, if it was any other Empyrean realm cultivator in the Azure Sky world, it would be difficult for them to resist this terrifying and strange power. Who exactly is this figure? Ling Xiao frowned slightly. For the first time, a gloomy expression appeared on his face. Then, he suddenly withdrew his ancient sword and dispersed his spiritual power. His eyes suddenly surged with a monstrous battle intent. Chapter 12:18. Buzz. The void shook, and layers of ripples covered the entire illusory space like waves. At this moment, Ling Xiao did not use any spiritual energy when facing Ling Yingying's punch. He only used his physical strength to meet Ling Yingying's punch. Not only had his physical body fused with 4 heavenly demon bones, but he had also refined 500 of the 3,000 sword bones. Moreover, he was wearing the unforgiven demonic armor. Not to mention, when Ling Xiao integrated the universe dragon soul, he used the power of the true dragon saint soul to refine his physical body for 49 days. With all these opportunities, his physical strength was comparable to a Supreme Being expert. And Supreme Being, Ling Xiao's eyes were cold. Or rather, Ling Ying was more terrifying than he expected. Every time Ling Xiao saw that cold, indifferent, and calm face before him, Ling Xiao always felt that he didn't seem to be a battle machine without any intelligence. Am I mistaken? But no matter what, if he couldn't destroy Ling Ying today, it would be a flaw in his Dao heart. Other people only had one Dao of invincibility. But Ling Xiao's Dao of invincibility was invincibility. Since you can crush people with your physical body, I'll crush you with my physical body and prove myself to be invincible. Buzz. Ling Xiao's sword intent sword. Even though he didn't use any spiritual energy, the sword intent around him was enough to shake heaven and earth. Boom! In the end, the 2 fists collided. Visible ripples in the void swept through the entire area. In front of them, a crack in space stretched for thousands of miles. It was the purest darkness in the world. But, just as Ling Xiao expected, his physical body was the best in the world. Even if Ling Ying was talented, he couldn't compete with him. But compared to ordinary azure sky prodigies, Ling Ying's physical strength was indeed shocking. He was only sent flying a few hundred feet away. The arm that collided with Ling Xiao didn't break at all. It only dimmed a little. "You're really strong." Ling Xiao's eyes were clear and cold, and his body began to emit a resplendent glow. These rays of light connected together and were completely compatible with his bones. It was the innate, immortal rhythm contained within the 500 sword bones. The aura of the great Tao lingered in the sky as countless runes and ancient scriptures were imprinted on it. Ling Xiao did not give the spirit shadow any time to breathe as he struck out with his palm, crushing the world. 100-meter-long handprint descended from the sky, exuding a piercingly cold, immortal intent. Slay the immortals above and punish the traitors below. Along the way, there were countless divine shadows that appeared in the world. It was as if they had come from the ancient times and stood in front of the sword palm. Boom, boom. Monstrous divine might swept out in all directions, and ripples spread out in all directions. The originally shattered space within the illusory wall was now crushed into powder like colored glass. Only Gu Chaoxiai's body seemed to be enveloped by an immortal aura, and it formed a universe of its own that completely resisted the terrifying might that surged over. Boom, boom. The sword palm descended from the sky, although it did not contain a trace of spiritual power. However, this attack formed by the innate sword intent was undoubtedly even more terrifying. This was the first time Ling Xiao had fully displayed the might of the 500 sword bones. Under the sword palm, the light outside the spirit shadow's body also showed signs of dissipating. Then, he rose up against the sky and formed a seal with both his fists. Like a meteor, he furiously rushed toward the sword palm. Boom! Dazzling divine light instantly covered the sky. The entire illusory wall finally completely collapsed at this moment. However, just as the cracks in the void formed scars and spread out, a chaotic aura suddenly circulated around Gu Chaoxiai's body. In an instant, the shattered space was rapidly fusing together at a speed visible to the naked eye, and it was restored to its original state. Finally, the spiritual light between heaven and earth disappeared, and the spirit shadow's figure suddenly appeared above the void. At this moment, half of his body was already shattered, and only half of his head was left. However, he still stood in the sky, and his remaining eye revealed an inexplicable vicissitude of dominance. Buzz! At this moment, a ripple suddenly appeared in the space in front of him. Then, Ling Xiao's figure seemed to have stepped through time and space and appeared in front of the spirit shadow. Behind him, a golden dragon shadow floated over. As he punched, the dragon shadow immediately hissed and turned into a 3-inch golden light that poured into his fist. Pucci! Without the slightest hesitation, he did not utter a single word of nonsense. As Ling Xiao's fist landed, it instantly pierced through the spirit shadow's body, and its sole consciousness was destroyed. But what was frightening was that a brilliant smile suddenly blossomed on Ling Ying's face. He looked at Ling Xiao calmly, and his remaining eye was filled with monstrous battle intent and endless Taoist rhymes. "I finally waited for you." "Waited for me?" Ling Xiao's eyes narrowed slightly, and he slowly withdrew his fist, looking at the spirit shadow that was slowly dissipating. Suddenly, he realized that this person could not be the Realm Lord. If the Realm Lord knew of his existence and deliberately hid in the dark to set up a trap, he would not expose his intentions at this time. The sentence, "I've finally waited for you," was more like a kind of provocation, a kind of unresigned obsession. "I'll be back, and we'll meet soon." "Who are you?" "Me?" The spirit shadow lowered his head and looked at Gu Chaoxiai on the mountain peak in the distance. There seemed to be some doubt in his eyes. I'm a passerby of the eternal world, the first immortal in 100,000 years. Boom! The moment the spirit shadow finished speaking, his figure suddenly shattered, turning into mottled light and completely dissipating. Ling Xiao stood in the void and fell into deep thought. A passerby of the eternal world, the first immortal in 100,000 years? With Junhan's strength, when he was in the venerable realm, a spirit shadow could compete with him, the reincarnation of the sky demon. One could imagine how terrifying his real body was. But it was impossible for such a person to remain unknown. Even if he was an expert from 100,000 years ago, Ling Xiao should have heard of him. The first immortal in 100,000 years. Ling Xiao did not know how much of this title was exaggerated. After all, the destined people were all arrogant, domineering, and invincible. But why was he waiting for him? Will they meet soon? Could it be that the spirit shadow's real body was not in the azure world? Ling Xiao's eyes gradually turned cold, but his heart was filled with emotions. Since the upper realm, he had not felt out of control for a long time. The unknown hatred, the sudden revelation of the secrets of heaven and earth. Even if he was careful at every step and treated the world as a chess piece, now it seemed that he was not necessarily not a chess piece in someone else's chess game. One's vision was always proportional to one's strength. What Ling Xiao had always been doing was jumping out of the overall situation of heaven and earth and accumulating strength in secret. In this way, even if one day the fog dispersed and the real chess player appeared, Ling Xiao would still have the power to overturn the 9 heavens and 10 earths. In the end, whether it was Ling Tian, Chun Qingshan, Bai Ling, Lin Meng, Su Yin, or the other girls, they were just Ling Xiao's means to set up heaven and earth and plot against the 9 heavens. He scattered them in the dark and developed them. One day, when danger came, there would be people who were willing to die, making him immortal. In these 9 heavens, the name Ling Xiao should be revered. But if Junhan was the strongest immortal in 100,000 years, did it mean that the sky demon had already died in that era? Chapter 1219. Variables. Ling Xiao lowered his head and looked at the fragmented cracks in the void and the crisscrossing chaos Tao intent. There was a rare solemn look in his eyes. As his cultivation level increased, a corner of the great mystery of heaven and earth was finally revealed. A passerby in the mortal world, an immortal in the 9 heavens. No matter who his opponent was, Ling Xiao was naturally fearless. After all, there was no one in this world who had a more terrifying background than him. Even if someone was secretly controlling everything, Ling Xiao still had methods that they could not understand at all. System. Forging the heavenly will, seizing opportunities, and adding unlimited points. When Ling Xiao, the first primordial demon, achieves the heavenly will body, this immortal path would probably enter a different period of brilliance. I use the heavenly will as my servant, and the heavenly Tao as my contract. With a wave of my hand, I should be able to slaughter the world. If the most powerful person in this world was not him 100,000 years later, did it mean that he had perished at the peak of his Tao path? Was this the ending that the sky demon should have after being reborn? Or was this the ending after he transmigrated? Buzz! In the end, Ling Xiao did not think too much. Instead, he descended from the sky and sat cross-legged beside Gu Chao Ci. He devoured all the Taoist runes and divine armaments that were gathered by her chaos Tao into his body. In the end, the opportunities of heaven and earth were ever-changing. Only strength was the foundation of variables. This illusory space was on the verge of shattering. If not for Gu Chao Ci's terrifying Tao laws, these Taoist runes would have dissipated long ago. Even so, it was impossible for her to merge all 10,000 top-notch geniuses' spirit clones with her own strength. Yes, sharing honor and disgrace. Buzz! Gu Chao Ci seemed to have felt the changes in the spirit aura around her. She frowned slightly and looked at Ling Xiao indifferently. The corners of her mouth seemed to curl up into a smile. Suddenly, the entire illusory space was silent. Only the two figures sitting cross-legged on the mountain peak were shrouded in thousands of rays of light. They were like an immortal couple, otherworldly and otherworldly. At the same time, in the Daotian Academy, one figure after another passed through the gate of immortality and walked into everyone's sight. However, at this moment, the expressions of all the Academy elders were somewhat gloomy and grave. For the human race, the destruction of two great trial treasures was a blessing. With such a prodigy, the human race had finally ushered in an opportunity to revive. But for the Daotian Academy, it was a loss of foundation, and it was showing signs of decline. Unfortunately, the main culprit was the young master of the Ling people. As such, no matter how much resentment they had, they could only grit their teeth and swallow it. That's right. As the hope of the human race, it is an honor for all of you to pass the 3 trials and enter the academy. Dao Xinji, the master of the Dao Academy, took a step forward and looked coldly at the prodigies before him. He nodded slightly. The Daotian Academy is dedicated to the revival of the human race. Our goal is to nurture the true backbone of the human race. Since you have the talent, you should abandon all distracting thoughts and focus on the Tao. Having no desires or thoughts is the essence of the Tao. As soon as Dao Xinji's voice fell, a wisp of complicated bitterness appeared on the faces of many disciples, and they immediately frowned. Bah, what do you mean by no desires or thoughts? Are you going to say something about the heartless Tao again? Beside him, Zhong Tu, the master of the Array Academy, sneered with a mocking expression. I see that the young master of the Ling people and Gu Chao Ci have also not cultivated the heartless Tao. Let me ask you, how many people in the Azure continent can stand shoulder to shoulder with them? You. Dao Xinji was momentarily speechless, not knowing how to refute. That's right. The heartless Tao was the ultimate truth of the path to immortality. The original intention was to abandon all distracting thoughts and focus on the Tao. Only by having no desires or thoughts could one reach the peak. But now, Ling Xiao had ascended to the divine Tao, shattered the God monument, and broken the illusion. Such a magnificent feat could be said to be unparalleled in history. It was truly a feat that no one had ever done before, and no one would be able to do it in the future. After all, even if there were people with unparalleled talent later on, they would not have a chance. The monument wall had already shattered, so how could they break it? You few, if any of you are interested in the Array Tao, you can come to the Array Academy for a discussion. Zhong Tu's gaze paused for a moment on Xianyuan Weiyang before he turned and led the disciples of the Array Academy behind him away. Ha! All of you have passed the trial today and are the top of the generation. The Daotian Academy has always been indiscriminate in our education. No matter where you are from, as long as you are willing to enter the academy, you can do so. Ji-Chu. Li Rulin smiled faintly. His elegance made him look extraordinary. However, at this moment, Li Ji-Chu looked inexplicably disappointed and absent-minded. Oh, Ji-Chu? Senior sister, Master is calling for you. Lu Ming frowned slightly and gently touched Li Ji-Chu's arm. The latter was stunned and bowed in a panic. Yes, disciple. Lead the senior brothers and senior sisters to the Hanlin Academy. That will be their temporary lodging. Yes. Li Ji-Chu nodded slightly. The loneliness on her face disappeared as she smiled faintly. There are still 10 days before the Academy Master's Lecture. In these 10 days, the 4 academies will have a martial arts competition. You can also learn from the disciples of the Academy. If you have any doubts, you can look for the elders of the Academy at any time. As soon as he finished speaking, Li Rulin took a deep look at Li Ji-Chu before turning around and walking into the distance. As for the other 2 hall masters and their disciples, their interest waned, and they all left. Originally, they were guarding this place mainly to see Lord Ling Xiao. Who would have thought that the young master and the empress seemed to have had a fortuitous encounter in the illusory wall and had yet to come out? However, since the 4 academy masters did not say much, the 2 of them should not be in danger. It seemed that they would have to postpone their meeting with Lord Ling Xiao for another 2 days. Should we inform the Academy Master about this? Li Rulin, Dao Xinji, and Hong Guji walked side by side, frowning and asking in a low voice. What is it? The shattering of the illusory wall? With the Academy Master's character, would he care about this? Moreover, do you expect the Ling people to compensate the Academy? Dao Xinji shook his head and sighed. Li Rulin smiled bitterly. I'm referring to the Ling people's young master being trapped in the illusory wall. Of course, he did not expect the Ling people to lower their heads to the Daotian Academy because of this. With his clan's way of doing things, once the Daotian Academy threatened them with this, the Dao Mountain would be razed to the ground in less than a day. Although this clan lived in seclusion, they had never interfered with the affairs of the Qing Tsang continent. However, all the forces in the Qing Tsang continent knew that there were only 2 points that could not be violated when interacting with this clan. Do not use reason to oppress people. Do not let Ling people be reasonable. Otherwise, even if it was an immortal inheritance, it would be destroyed in the blink of an eye. With the strength of that young man and Gu Chao Ci, it should be easy for them to escape from the illusory wall. Now that the aura in the wall is vast and mighty, it is most likely that the 2 of them have encountered a fortuitous opportunity. If we disturb them rashly, it will be counterproductive. Hong Guji's tone was indifferent. He turned to look at Li Rulin. The 2 of you should focus on the final battle in 3 days. This is true. That Ling Xiao's talent is unparalleled. Originally, everyone thought that the young master of the World Lord Palace, Xue Xian, would suppress this generation sooner or later and restore the glory of the World Lord Palace. Unexpectedly, the young master of the Ling people, who suddenly appeared, is even more monstrous. How old is he? Li Rulin sighed deeply. He was deep in thought. Unfortunately, with their standpoints, there will be a life-and-death battle in the end. Otherwise, the human race would really have a chance to revive. Hong Guji took a deep breath. His eyes were full of vicissitudes. Ever since Wenran Zhiga died at the hands of the Sky Demon, he had not appeared in the Academy for a long time. Unexpectedly, in just a few months, the young master of the Ling people has become famous in the Qing Tsang continent. As expected, he is righteous. He should be invincible in the world. Chapter 1220. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. In these 3 days, Yao Guang, Xinyuan Weiyang, and the others also toured many interesting places in the academy with Li Zhichu. Of course, during this period, Li Zhichu also inquired about Ling Zhao's recent news. As for Shun Jing and Yuan Tianji and the others, they each looked for disciples of the 4 courtyards to spar and discuss the Tao. Only Yang Yuan and Zhang Jiuji were now on a mission. They sneaked around the academy all day long, trying to find some useful information. Needless to say, with the luck of these 2 people, they really did find some secrets. Although the Daotian Academy had 4 courtyards, there was only one scripture pavilion, located in the center of the 4 courtyards in front of the Elders' Hall. Normally, this scripture pavilion was not open to disciples. Only those who had made outstanding contributions to the academy had the chance to enter and choose cultivation methods to cultivate. It could be said that this scripture pavilion included many classics and divine abilities from the past 100,000 years of Qing Song. It was even rumored that there was a code that had been handed down for generations. It was the foundation of the Daotian Academy. Of course, a place like this would always be guarded by experts. At the very least, there were 2 Sage Realm elders guarding the scripture pavilion every day. Given Yang Yuan's strength, it was clearly not very possible for him to sneak in without anyone noticing. Therefore, he needed an opportunity and someone to cover him. It was said that the scripture pavilion's guards were the most lax when a master of Daotian Academy appeared to give a lecture. At that time, all the elders of the academy would go to the lecture venue to listen to the sage's teachings. Perhaps that would be Yang Yuan's only chance. Although Yang Yuan felt a little guilty for stealing, he still felt a little guilty. But when he thought of the black-clothed figure that towered above the heavens and earth, the worries in his heart quietly dissipated. He had to obtain the reincarnation heavenly abode or the myriad weapon Taoist scripture. Otherwise, even if he chased with all his might, he would still be too insignificant in front of the young master of the ancient clans. The Tao of cultivation was particular about wealth, techniques, companions, and land. Among them, the word wealth in the first place did not refer to ordinary spirit stones or treasures, but cultivation resources, with the foundation of the Ling people. Not to mention that Ling Xiao was extremely talented. Even a pig would be able to reach the supreme martial artist realm as long as it took medicine and cultivated step by step. The great Tao was fair. How laughable. Junior sister Xia, I want to go to the elders' hall to ask the elders some questions about cultivation. Do you want to come with me? Yang Yuan turned to look at Xia Zhimeng beside him. His smile was bright, but his eyes seemed to be avoiding her gaze. All right. Xia Zhimeng gently nodded and did not refuse. At this time, of course she knew what Yang Yuan was planning, but inexplicably, she really wanted to help him find that cultivation method as soon as possible. It was not that Xia Zhimeng wanted to help Yang Yuan obtain the good fortune in the reincarnation heavenly abode. It was just that she had had enough of this senior brother who always raised flags. Haha, let's go then. Yang Yuan did not suspect anything and walked side by side with Xia Zhimeng towards the center of the academy. At this time, in the Hanlin Academy, Zhang Juji was beside a group of academy disciples, carefully listening to their conversation. How do you think the young master of the Ling people is compared to senior brother Dao Wuya? I think senior brother Dao Wuya is stronger. After all, he is the only one who was brought there by the academy master to train his Dao heart. I wonder if senior brother Dao Wuya will come out of seclusion with the academy master this time. He should. After all, senior brother has been in seclusion for 100 years. He should be able to enter the saint realm directly after coming out. That's too scary. A saint realm cultivator who is less than 400 years old. Senior brother Dao Wuya should be able to enter the sequence. The sequence does not only look at cultivation, but also talent. That Yaoguang Bodhisattva and the young master of the World Lord's Hall are also not saints, but they are already in the sequence. That's true. However, I still think highly of senior brother Dao Wuya. Hearing the discussion in front of him, Zhang Juji raised his eyebrows slightly. An ray of light suddenly flashed in his eyes. That place? Listen, what did those words mean? It meant that even ordinary academy disciples did not dare to casually mention that place. Moreover, the place to train one's Dao heart was definitely filled with danger. It was definitely not a safe place. According to Ying Yu, there was a sky demon sealed in the Dao Tian Academy. Do you understand? Such a sky demon treasure would definitely be carefully guarded by the Dao Tian Academy's master. In fact, in Zhang Juji's opinion, the Dao Tian Academy's master would very likely personally guard this treasure. Therefore, senior brother, I wonder who the senior brother Dao Wuya you mentioned just now is. Zhang Juji's expression was humble as he bowed to the academy disciples. Hearing that, they immediately frowned and looked over. When they saw Zhang Juji's ordinary face again, they sneered. You don't even know senior brother Dao Wuya? This is my first time entering the world to cultivate. I'm ignorant and inexperienced. Senior brothers, please don't laugh at me. However, I've always heard that the Dao Tian Academy is the sacred land of the human race. There are countless monsters, and I have a lot of respect for them. I think that senior brother Dao Wuya should be a true monster of our academy. Zhang Jiuji's temperament was much more flexible than ordinary Tianming. This could be seen from how he tricked Inu back then. Of course, with Inu's scheming, she was just using him to get out of the stupa abyss. The two of them could only be considered as scheming against each other. Hearing that, the academy disciples' faces immediately revealed a hint of pride. Of course, senior brother Dao Wuya is also recognized as the #1 disciple of our generation. He's the best in the 4 academies. His talent is unparalleled. Then where is this senior brother now? After hearing what you said, I can't hold back the excitement in my heart. I want to personally admire this senior brother, Dao Wuya's heroic appearance. Zhang Jiuji's smile was gentle, but there was a crafty look in his eyes. You came at the wrong time. Senior brother Dao Wuya was already brought to the Saint Peak in the center of the academy to cultivate by the academy master 100 years ago. The disciples shook their heads. However, on the day of the academy master's lecture, perhaps senior brother Dao Wuya will come out of seclusion. Saint Peak? What is that place? It sounds very awesome. Zhang Jiuji put his finger in his mouth and tilted his head, pretending to be ignorant and retarded. It's more than awesome. That's the place where our academy master secluded himself to comprehend the Tao all year round. There's a fairy's cave in there that's extremely mysterious. There's often Tao plasma flowing out. If you can enter it, cough, cough. Junior brother Go, you talk too much. Be careful not to be punished by master. Right when one of the disciples, surnamed Go, wanted to explain in detail about this mysterious cave that flowed with Tao plasma, a disciple by his side suddenly interrupted him. Oh, I'm slightly unable to restrain myself when this cave is mentioned. Huh, young man, I advise you not to be curious. Because according to what those senior brothers of my academy said, this cave isn't a place you can enter as you please. If your body isn't strong enough. Cough, cough. In short, that's a restricted area of my academy, and you don't have the qualifications to enter. As soon as he finished speaking, all the disciples of the academy instantly walked away while laughing, leaving Zhang Jiuji standing on the spot by himself. The brilliance on his face had vanished long ago. Chapter 1221. Mysterious Cave Entrance. Tao Paste. Forbidden Area of the Academy. Zhang Jiuji muttered to himself. He had a strange feeling when these words were put together. But if this was only the place where the master of Daotian Prefecture was in seclusion, how could it be called a forbidden area? It was obvious that there were some secrets hidden in this. It was very likely that it was the Sky Demon's treasure that Inu mentioned. In 7 days, the master of Daotian Prefecture would appear and give a lecture. By then, it might be his only chance to get close to this mysterious cave. As for the senior brother Wuya that the disciples were talking about, Zhang Jiuji felt a little pressured. He was the champion of the 4 academies and had been in seclusion for 100 years. If he was just an ordinary youth of the same generation, Zhang Jiuji would not have any concerns. However, if this person really had the potential to be a sequence, he had to be more careful. After all, he did not dare to use the power of the 9 Suns Pagoda and Inu casually in this academy. However, it seemed that Inu's judgment was right. With the immortal spirit talisman concealing his aura, no one in the Daotian Academy would be able to recognize him. As such, he only needed to wait for 7 days. When a master came out of seclusion, he could enter the cave to explore its depths. At the thought of this, Zhang Jiuji could only feel a sense of pride in his chest. There was a trace of sinister evil in his eyes. Since he could not find an immortal, he might as well seek help from a demon. Since everyone in the world accuses him of being a demon, then he would use the demon path to prove that his Tao heart was pure. Creation was on his side. On the morning of the 4th day, above Tao Mountain, golden light filled the sky as the sun rose. There was a purple aura that rose 90,000 miles from the east. The clouds were blue and colorful. The sacred mountains and immortal trees had recovered overnight. Looking from afar, the entire Tao Mountain seemed to be covered in holy light. All kinds of strange phenomena could be seen rising into the sky, as if it was out of this world. In front of the Elder Hall in the center of the academy, the geniuses and demons from all over the Azure continent, as well as the disciples of the 4 academies, had already gathered. At this moment, in the square in front of the hall, there was a tall battle platform. The masters and elders of the 4 academies sat in front of the platform, looking at the 4 youths above. These 4 people were the ones who represented the 4 academies in the final battle in the Martial Arts Academy. Each of them was handsome and had a Tao aura around them. Lu Ming was dressed in black. He looked clean and handsome. His features were delicate, and he had a certain charm to him. Today is the final battle between the disciples of the Daotian Academy. The winner will be qualified to enter the Hidden Scriptures Pavilion and choose an ancient scripture to cultivate. Furthermore, he will be given the title of the #1 disciple of the 4 academies. On the fighting ring, a white-haired elder said indifferently, "For tens of thousands of years, the title of prime disciple had always been held by academy disciples. The Tao Academy was publicly acknowledged as the strongest academy among the 4 academies. This time, however, the first disciple of the Tao Academy, Tao Wuya, had gone into seclusion with the Academy Lord and had yet to emerge. The head disciple of the Puppet Institute, Wenren Jiga, even went down to the Foliaceae and died. The one from the Path of Arrays had a frivolous personality. Just like his master, he didn't care about these titles and gave up on this competition of his own accord. On the other hand, Li Jichu's cultivation was not high. She was the only new chief disciple in the last 10 years. Once she was defeated, she would become a laughingstock. Therefore, Li Rilin didn't allow her to participate in this competition. Initially, everyone thought that this year's martial arts meet would be boring. Unexpectedly, there was a young disciple from the Confucian Academy called Lu Ming who defeated several 6th grade and 7th grade geniuses consecutively despite being a 5th grade venerable. Apart from Lu Ming, there was also a disciple from the Puppet Institute and 2 disciples from the Tao Academy, standing on the fighting ring. Everyone knew that the path of array formation was particular about setting up an array and forming seals. However, it took time to do all this. Therefore, it was inevitable that one would be deliberately targeted in a head-on battle. Before one could display their true skills, they would be blasted off the fighting ring. The 4 of you draw lots to decide your opponents. The white-haired elder took out a bamboo tube with 4 bamboo sticks in it. Lu Ming and the others took out a bamboo stick from the tube and handed it back to the elder. Lu Ming from the Confucian Institute versus Wu Daji from the Puppet Institute. Qin Feng from the Tao Academy versus Gu Yuxiao from the Tao Academy. As soon as he finished speaking, the white-haired elder turned around and walked down the fighting ring. The 2 disciples from the Tao Academy followed behind him and walked down the fighting ring, leaving space for Lu Ming and Wu Daji. Haha, junior brother Lu has been in the limelight recently. I heard that you defeated several 6th grade and 7th grade senior brothers in a row. Wu Daji was thin and his face was gloomy. His red robe made him look sinister. However, since he could make it all the way to the final battle, one could only imagine his cultivation and means. A 7th grade venerable was already a top existence among the younger generation of the Daotian Academy. Since Wenren Jiga's death, Senior Brother Wu had become the leader of the Puppet Institute. Senior Brother Wu. Lu Ming bowed slightly with a calm expression. Although he was only a 5th grade venerable, his cultivation technique was quite special. An ordinary venerable was definitely no match for him. In the 4 academies, the ones that Lu Ming took seriously were the chief disciples of the 4 academies. In particular, Dao Wuya from the Tao Academy and Ning Chuan from the Array Academy. Of the 2, one had a flawless Tao heart and cultivated the Taiyin Tao scripture. His every word and action implied the truth of the heavenly Tao. Now, the Academy Master had personally brought him to the Saint Peak to guide his cultivation. The other was born with array eyes and was extremely talented. Although he rarely fought, it was said that Dao Wuya had once fought with him and was defeated. As for senior brother Wu Daji, although he was also a genius in the Tao of puppets, he was much weaker than Wenren Jiga. Ha! Young people are so proud and arrogant. Forget it. I'll spar with you today and let you know that the immortal path is unpredictable. Seeing that Lu Ming was neither servile nor overbearing, Wu Daji sneered. The moment he took a step forward, 2 puppets appeared behind him at the same time. Buzz! Both puppets were clad in heavy armor and looked as ferocious as demons. Evil aura surged around them, and their claws were as sharp as blades. They had been tempered to be indestructible. As Wu Daji's hand seals changed, the 2 demonic puppets let out ear-piercing screeches and pounced on Lu Ming from both sides. Boom! The vast demonic power covered heaven and earth. At this moment, Many disciples from the four courtyards had a mocking smile on their faces. Recently, Lu Ming had been too pretentious and had offended many geniuses from the four courtyards. As for Wu Daji's two demonic puppets, they were famous among their peers. It was said that the two puppets were found by the genius from the Puppet Institute in an ancient mystic realm. Their original forms were two ancient demons that were controlled by him using the Tao of puppets. Their killing power was terrifying. Even those who were at the peak of the venerable realm did not dare to fight them head-on. Lu Ming? Although this disciple from the Confucian Institute was indeed quite powerful and had embarrassed many people recently, he was at the peak of the venerable realm. It was as if he was facing three powerful figures at the 6th or 7th stage of the venerable realm at the same time. It was almost impossible for him to win. Between Lu Ming and senior brother Wu Daji, who do you think will win? After all, we can tell from his name that senior brother Daji is very talented. Senior brother, what you said makes sense. Chapter 1222. Boom, boom. Demonic clouds surged in the void thousands of miles away. Two demonic puppets stretched out their palms, piercing through the sky and pressing down on Lu Ming's head with unparalleled power. Even Li Jichu and the others had worried looks on their faces when they saw the ferocious aura fluctuating in the air. However, just when everyone thought that Lu Ming would be seriously injured or even defeated by the two demonic puppets, a dazzling divine glow suddenly bloomed around his body. It was a holy and gentle glow. It was bright and scorching, dispelling all the coldness in the area. Under everyone's shocked gaze, his body was pierced by the two demonic puppets' palms until it completely dissipated. It's an incarnation. It's actually an incarnation. Confucian Institute's righteous body. I didn't expect Lu Ming to have mastered this classic. The group of disciples shouted in shock. Obviously, they did not expect this young disciple from the Confucian Institute to be so talented. However, before they could be shocked, the void in front of Wu Daji suddenly fluctuated for a moment, and Lu Ming's figure appeared like a ghost. There seemed to be a wisp of evil energy circulating around his body. However, under the cover of the two demonic puppets' auras, even the masters of the four colleges did not detect any clues. Wu Daji's eyes narrowed slightly. The seals in his hands changed, and he hurriedly summoned the two puppets to defend against the enemy. However, at this moment, a faint smile appeared on Lu Ming's face. Senior brother Daji, it's too late. As soon as he finished speaking, there seemed to be a golden glow in his eyes, deriving many divine images. His palms gently pressed out. There were thousands of divine patterns in his palms, revealing a kind of overwhelming power that encompassed everything. Humph! Do you think you've won? Do you think those two demonic puppets are all I have? Childish. However, at this moment, there was no trace of panic on Wu Daji's face. Instead, there was a disdainful smile on his face. Afterward, he suddenly clenched his fists and directly shattered his outer clothes, revealing a sinister-looking pitch-black armor. This armor seemed to have merged with his body, appearing strange and inexplicable. In fact, the disciples of the four courtyards only knew that Wu Daji had found two ancient devil corpses in the secret realm and refined them into puppets, but they didn't know that he had obtained such a devil armor. However, this armor was a demonic item after all. Even with Wu Daji's strength, he only dared to merge with it after refining it for 100 years. Although he did not know the grade of the armor, he had tested it countless times. Even the attacks of the two devilish puppets could not shake the armor in the slightest. As such, who among his peers could be his match? Invincible. Today, I'll show you the true power of my Puppet Institute. Wu Daji laughed maniacally, completely disregarding the young man in front of him. However, just as he was about to hold the teenager's hand in his, he saw a mocking smile on Lu Ming's face. Following that, an item seemed to have appeared in his hand. It was a transparent dagger flickering with 7-colored light. Before Wu Daji could react, Lu Ming waved his hand. A ray of dim light shot to heaven and earth, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. A painful scream was heard immediately. Wu Daji, who had been in high spirits earlier, suddenly fell from the sky. His two outstretched arms were neatly severed by Lu Ming's dagger. Blood mist spewed out. It was a shocking sight. The devil armor that covered his skin was like a thin piece of paper. It could not withstand Lu Ming's power at all. How is that possible? The entire square was silent. There was a look of extreme shock on the faces of all the disciples and geniuses. Even Yao Guang's golden eyes seemed to reveal a trace of doubt. Just now, she actually sensed a trace of Buddha nature in the young man. Although it was very weak, Yao Guang still sensed it. He won? Junior brother Lu Ming. Well done. It was only when everyone from the Confucian Institute exclaimed in surprise that everyone recovered from their shock. Although they could not see clearly how Lu Ming had severed Wu Daji's arms, it was obvious that this young disciple of the Confucian Institute had once again turned the tables and successfully defeated an opponent with a higher cultivation level than him. Hearing the cheers below the fighting ring, Lu Ming turned his head indifferently and looked at the smiling lady in white in the crowd. At this moment, Li Zichu's face also revealed a trace of gentleness. Right from the beginning, she knew that this junior brother was not ordinary. From him, Li Zichu could always feel a kind of elegant, easygoing, resolute, and unswerving character. He was righteous, but did not fall in love. He was decisive in killing. The decree of the Confucian Institute was to establish a heart for heaven and earth, establish a life for the people, inherit the lost skills of the past sages, and establish peace for all ages. Now, it seemed that Lu Ming might be more suitable than her to be the first disciple. Junior brother, fly and amaze the world with a single brilliant feat, become the number one in the 4 courtyards. At that time, I will definitely report to Master and give you the position of the first disciple of the Confucian Institute. Then, I will travel the world with my sword and pursue the Tao in my heart. Senior sister, how do I compare to Ling Xiao now? Lu Ming's eyes were bright as he asked softly in his heart. If not for the fact that he had an obsession in his heart, he would definitely not reveal his trump card so easily. This immortal path was ancient, and there should be nothing to worry about. However, Ling Xiao's appearance and Li Zichu's transformation had unknowingly affected his Tao heart. Chaos had arrived and thousands of talents were fighting for supremacy. Lu Ming would eventually become the true faith of Qing Song. The sky demon had appeared, and there was nothing in the 9 heavens. A heaven-defying person had to face a calamity. Boom! At the same time, in the space of the illusory wall, at the peak of the mountain, 2 figures were as immovable as boulders. Both of them were surrounded by Tao runes, and spirit splendor filled the sky. 2 divine figures, 1 dragon and 1 phoenix, towered between heaven and earth. Endless avatars rose alternately. Divine lightning, raging flames, ancient trees, and rivers lingered in all directions. It was as if a new era's painting was slowly unfolding. However, no matter how the avatars changed, the 2 figures seemed to be detached from the world and had the same lifespan as heaven and earth. Until thunderclouds began to gather in the void thousands of miles away. A vast sea of thunder fell from the sky, containing extreme destruction. However, unlike ordinary tribulation thunder, the color of the sea of thunder was a strange pitch-black color. There were wisps of golden splendor lingering in it, like the first ray of holy light that pierced through the darkness. It was sacred and could destroy all Taos. Ling Xiao's eyes suddenly opened. He looked calmly at the sea of thunder that spread out thousands of miles. Surprisingly, there was no trace of obstruction. Instead, he turned and walked into the distance. At this point, he had already integrated most of the Tao runes in this illusory space. However, Ling Xiao still had plans in his heart and did not take this opportunity to break through to the Saint Realm. Indeed, the system was his greatest reliance. However, relying too much on external forces was ultimately too much of a fluke. A supreme foundation was the greatest guarantee to reach the peak of the immortal path. On the other hand, Gu Chaoxiai's realm, which had fallen, finally showed signs of improvement at this moment. With the Tao runes in this place, it was enough to support her to step out of the shackles and achieve the true power of the Saint Realm. Have you reached the Saint Realm? My wife, you really didn't disappoint me. Chapter 1223. Boom! When the golden radiance in the vast sea of lightning became extremely dazzling, the heavens and earth shattered. When the heavens and earth were created, the primordial aura of the great Tao began to surge. Billions of years had already withered. Time had passed quickly. What was eternity? The blue sky should be destroyed. Immortals and gods should fall. Only the lonely figure in the phoenix robe stood in the middle of the apocalypse. Her eyes were cold, and her hair danced in the wind. She could start a new era. Gu Chaoxiai opened her eyes. There seemed to be billions of divine runes in her eyes. They were ancient and ancient. Just a ray of light from her eyes made the heavens and earth lose its color. Everything became silent. The thunderclouds in a radius of 90,000 miles shook violently. They actually showed signs of collapsing under her gaze. However, at this moment, Gu Chaoxiai did not look at the tribulation clouds. Instead, she turned to look at the figure in the sky. A faint smile suddenly appeared on her dreamy face. She was peerless and unparalleled in the world. Even with Ling Zhao's temperament, his eyes trembled slightly at this moment. There was an inexplicable fluctuation in his heart. Especially at this moment, Gu Chaoxiai stood alone under the apocalyptic tribulation. Her hair danced in the wind, and her fair-skinned face was white. Even if time was shattered and the blue sky collapsed, she did not seem to care. Everything that entered her eyes was only a stubbornness. Reincarnation for thousands of years, the changes of eras, and no regrets. Ling Xiao, the galaxy is boiling. You are the ideal of the human world. Thousands of years have passed. You are the path of immortality. Boom! The sound of thunder was loud. It shook the mountains and rivers in a radius of 90,000 miles. Gu Chaoxiai's brows were calm. She looked up at the vast sea of lightning. Then she stepped out. Her phoenix robe fluttered in the wind. Her hair drooped down. On her phoenix robe, golden threads flowed. She was like a proud, nine heavens divine phoenix. She stepped towards the tribulation clouds. Below her feet, the two divine shadows of a dragon and a phoenix meandered into a sea. They were like a falling galaxy. They were like a celestial being. In the end, her figure entered the thunderclouds and disappeared. The entire world was filled with the sound of thunder. Bolts of blinding golden lightning descended from the sky, destroying everything in its path. It was as if everything in this illusory wall was illusory. People and time were illusory. They would shatter with a touch. Boundless, tranquil, world destruction, and new life. The originally opposing auras were quietly harmonized at this moment. Ling Zhao's eyes were clear, and his expression was indifferent. Then he waved his hand, and the surging power of the world began to pour out. However, the illusory space in front of him had strangely disappeared without a trace. A storm was brewing in the realm. In the blink of an eye, the originally clear sky turned dark. Su Yin, Phoenix Rouge, Bai Ling, and the others woke up from their seclusion. They raised their heads in shock and looked at the heavenly thunderclouds that had suddenly appeared. At this moment, they seemed to see the silhouette of a peerless phoenix sitting quietly in the center of the lightning. Even if the world was overturned and the great Tao was obliterated, she remained unmoved. However, before they could cry out in alarm, Ling Zhao's figure had already descended from the sky and landed on top of the Sky Palace. At this moment, his expression was also somewhat solemn. The power of the tribulation lightning had already exceeded the range that the illusory space could withstand. Moreover, the Lord of Daotian Manor was about to give a lecture. With Gu Chaoxiai's talent, she had already gone through 49 days of tribulation lightning the first time she became a saint. Presumably, it would be even longer this time. Although leaving her alone in the illusory space was not too surprising, it was still somewhat troublesome. After all, when the Lord of Daotian Manor appeared, Ling Xiao would have to prepare to fight for the demonic bone. Zhang Jiuji and Yang Yuan were already in position. However, it was still a little difficult for them to fight against a heavenly sovereign who had existed for countless years with just their luck. A heavenly sovereign who had taken responsibility for the revival of the human race, guarded the demonic bone, and had disciples everywhere. What he was after could not be fate. It could only be the world. Therefore, from the beginning, Ling Xiao did not see the Lord of Daotian Manor as a pedantic and stubborn antique. Instead, he saw him as a real opponent. Young master. Phoenix Rouge narrowed her eyes and looked at Ling Xiao in surprise. This is, in fact, she already had a guess in her heart. She was so magnificent and mighty. Other than praising the Empress, no one else could be brought into the realm by her young master to undergo tribulation. For the first time, Phoenix Rouge felt a real threat. No matter how exquisite her makeup was, it would only look vulgar in front of such a peerless empress. Even if she did not see Gu Chaoxiai's face clearly, just her figure alone was already magnificent and clear like the stars in the world. You don't have to care about her. Just cultivate on your own, Ling Xiao said indifferently as he raised his head to look at the figure sitting upright in the clouds. Divine rivers, starry seas, mountains, rivers, and the moon. Many mystical scenes lingered in the void. The Tao was formed naturally, and the saint's might was already evident. The clouds overlapped, and the sky and the earth were one line. She was the only one in the entire world. Bai Ling, I have a task for you in a few days. Get ready. Ling Xiao turned to look at Bai Ling, then turned and disappeared. Behind him, Bai Ling's small face suddenly bloomed with a bright smile. Finally, she was going to contribute her strength to her brother. This feeling was very reassuring. Boom! Daotian Academy, in front of the Elders' Hall. On the battle platform, spirit power was overflowing and the divine aura was fluctuating. Lu Ming stood with his hands behind his back. He looked at Gu Yuxiao, who was a disciple of the Daotian Academy, and nodded slightly. Senior brother Gu, thank you for letting me win. Gu Yuxiao's face was gloomy, but at this moment, he was inexplicably doubtful and fearful. No, your aura is not right. When he fought with Lu Ming earlier, he could vaguely feel that there was a trace of coldness in his aura, especially the last palm print. It seemed to be the righteous aura of Confucianism, but when it landed on Gu Yuxiao, it exploded with a shocking chill. This aura was definitely not a Confucianism technique. You, who exactly are you? Boom. Ha ha. It's better to come at the right time. Has the number one of this cohort of the Daotian Academy been decided? It was just that. Just as Gu Yuxiao's expression was furious and he was about to exclaim, a wisp of dark clouds suddenly covered the sky above. Afterward, there was a burst of wild laughter. Endless demonic aura transformed into a sea, covering the sky and the earth. Under the demonic aura, several figures stood in the void, looking at Lu Ming, who was on the battle platform, with mocking gazes. There were 5 young men and women. They were incomparably handsome, and their auras were vigorous and mighty. Oh, how dare you, evildoer! How dare you behave atrociously in our Daotian Academy? The expressions of the elders of the academy changed abruptly. There was a strong sense of shock and astonishment in their eyes. Although, now that the academy master was giving a lecture, the Daotian Academy had removed the sect protection array. However, to be able to avoid the soul consciousness of several sage realm powerhouses stealthily, it was obvious that the identities of these 5 young men were not ordinary. Furthermore, to dare to provoke the Academy Master during such a grand event like the Academy Master's lecture, these 5 people were most likely the true demons of the demon clan. Boom! In an instant, there was a vast and mighty spirit power in the Academy, shattering the wind and clouds and soaring into the sky. Elders! But, at this moment, A cold and gentle voice suddenly came from behind the five of them. A graceful figure in golden clothes with fiery red hair stepped out slowly and appeared at the end of everyone's line of sight. On that fair and flawless face, there was a gentle and indifferent smile. In particular, the cinnabar in between her eyebrows made the blue sky dim and lose its brilliance. She stood in the sky, looking down at the clouds and mist below. As she looked around, there seemed to be a sense of tenderness and affection. Just a wisp of light from her eyes made the bodies of countless clan elites tremble and their breathing quicken. Compared to all the women of the human clan present, this beautiful figure in golden clothes was more noble and ostentatious. In the entire world, she was the only one who was dazzling. Furthermore, in the entire Azure continent, the only person who could be compared to her was probably the great Empress Immortal Phoenix, who had yet to come out from the illusion wall. You? Who are you? Chapter 1224. It's not important who I am. What's important is, I heard that the Daotian Academy has always emphasized education without discrimination. I have long admired it. I came here today with no ill intentions. I just want to spar with the geniuses of the Academy. May I know why the elders are so angry? The golden-robed woman stood proudly at the top of the sky. She looked elegant and noble. Her fiery hair danced like flames, containing infinite divinity. Divine patterns of the great Tao flickered in and out of her golden eyes. Her heavenly might was naturally formed. The five demon geniuses, who were originally arrogant and domineering, actually took the initiative to retreat behind her. They looked like they were obedient to her orders. The demons did not enter the 100 talents and did not enter the sequence. The Realm Lord established the Azure continent and set the rules. Demons, ghosts, and Xin Yuan clan were not allowed to step into the Azure continent. Otherwise, it would be considered a provocation and they would be killed without mercy. Originally, these three clans mostly hid in the polar regions of the Azure continent. Very few people entered the world in the past 100,000 years. Therefore, apart from a few demon young masters and the descendants of the ghosts, the other geniuses were mostly unknown. They were not as famous as the humans. Now that the Realm Lord was missing, these so-called rules were naturally less intimidating. Moreover, the rules only said that the strong could not enter the world. It did not say that the people of the current generation could not. The 6 people who suddenly appeared at this time were all of the younger generation. However, the demonic aura fluctuating from their bodies was as vast as the sea. It was obvious that they did not come with good intentions. The Daotian Academy's education without discrimination is only for the humans. I'm afraid you have come to the wrong place. The Dao Academy's master, Dao Shenji, looked up at the 6 figures in the sky and said coldly, "In this chaotic world, there were many geniuses. Although the demons were suppressed by the Realm Lord, their foundation was not something that a single clan or clan could contend against. Therefore, he did not dare to act rashly at this time. He was afraid that he would fall into the demon's trap. One should know that the 4 polar regions of the Azure continent were all desolate lands. The demons were originally powerful and were once the main characters of the world. They must be unwilling to accept this. If the 6 of them came here just to provoke, they would definitely become the subject of ridicule once the powerful cultivators of the Daotian Academy took action to suppress them. It might even cause the second great war between humans and demons in the last 100,000 years. Haha, you must be the Dao Academy's lord. The Dao Academy's lord's might is unparalleled, and his reputation is widespread. I don't think he would attack us juniors." The golden-robed woman smiled calmly. Even in the face of a true powerhouse of the human race, he did not bow in the slightest. Instead, he was somewhat disdainful. However, at this moment, her eyes seemed to be drifting as they swept past the crowd. In the end, there was actually a trace of disappointment in her eyes. Those who challenge the dignity of the human race will not be pardoned. Dao Shinji frowned slightly, his tone inexplicably gloomy. At that moment, he could feel that the demonic aura emitting from the woman was extremely terrifying. Even a supreme being like him felt an indescribable sense of fear when he sensed the energy fluctuations that were as vast as the sea of stars. Obviously, with the strength of these academy disciples, it would be difficult for anyone of the same generation to contend with them. Challenge? The Daotian Academy recruits aspiring youths from all over the world. Today, the Academy Master's Lecture is a grand occasion for the Azure Firmament Academy. We came all the way here just to admire the heroism of the human race's heavenly prodigies. Is this a challenge in the eyes of the Tao Academy's Lord? The golden-robed woman smiled faintly, but the mockery in her eyes was not concealed in the slightest. Should I call you humans cowardly, or sinister and hypocritical? Boom! Spirit aura surged across the entire mountain peak. Even the most cowardly of the human race disciples were enraged and shocked when they heard the golden-robed woman's words. They really could not figure out who this young woman was. How could she not care about the 4 Academy Masters at all? Academy Master, let me teach these arrogant bastards a lesson. That's right. Academy Master, we can't let them underestimate the strength of the human race. How dare you, demons? You don't know what's good for you. Around the square, the disciples of the various clans immediately roared in anger and helplessness. Meanwhile, the golden-robed woman and her companions looked at the crowd below with provocative expressions. Their eyes were full of playfulness. Now that the Realm Master was missing, the demon race had the ambition to conquer the world again. The 6 of them came today to test the Realm Master's palace's attitude. Perhaps they could use this as an excuse to stir up new chaos in the Azure Sky continent. Chaos had arrived. However, this chaos was not enough for the demon race and the forces of the 4 extremes. The Sky Demon had appeared. Now that the human race was facing a great calamity, the Realm Master still did not appear. This meant that perhaps he was really not in this world anymore. As long as the demon race could occupy the providence of the Azure Sky continent, even if the Realm Master returned, what could he do? Even with the immortal demon Ancient Bell, one snow-tide rock would not be able to suppress the thousands of races in the Azure Sky continent. All right, since the demon race wants to fight, how can we, the prodigies of the human race, retreat? Dao Xinji nodded with a gloomy expression. If Wei was here, he would not be too worried. However, other than Li Jichu, who had the lowest cultivation level among the 4 academies, the other 3 were either dead or in seclusion. They were not here at all. At this moment, everyone was enraged. Once the Daotian Academy took half a step back, the human race would lose its strength of character. The Daotian Academy could not bear this humiliation. Academy Master, you're exaggerating. We're just exchanging pointers and have no intention of provoking you. Of course, the golden-robed woman descended from the sky. There seemed to be divine flames floating under her feet, burning thousands of miles of the Azure Sky continent. Her figure leisurely sat on an elder's seat in front of the battle stage with her legs crossed. A brilliant and overbearing smile suddenly blossomed on her flawless face as she turned to look at the 5 youths who had landed behind her. If Academy Master insists that we're provoking you, then you'll beat them to death later. Dao Xinji and the other 3 Academy Masters looked at each other. Their gazes were deep and solemn. Since the demon race wants to see the prodigies of the human race's prodigy strength, does anyone want to come up and try? At this moment, Li Rulin suddenly smiled and looked at the crowd with a gentle gaze. With the prodigies of the Daotian Academy, it would be difficult to win this battle. Once they were defeated, they would not be able to live up to their reputation. However, if the contestants were prodigies from various races, even if they were defeated, it would not have much to do with the Daotian Academy. I'll take on the first battle. On the battle platform, Lu Ming sighed softly. His righteousness soared into the sky, stirring up the wind and clouds. Especially the resolute and cold determination in that pair of black eyes, it caused Gu Yuxiao to be even more shocked. The words that were originally at the tip of her tongue were all swallowed back down. That was right. When Lu Ming defeated him earlier, the technique that he used was indeed strange. However, what did it matter? Now that he was representing the human race, the stronger he was, the stronger he would be. Forget it. There was no need to care about the title of the top student of the 4 academies. As long as junior brother Lu could defeat these arrogant demons and bring glory to the academy. So what if he cultivated as a ghost or a demon? The righteousness of the race was always above everything else. Junior brother. It was just that. Just as Lu Ming turned his head and looked at the golden-robed woman with battle intent, a low shout suddenly came from below the battle platform. A tall figure stepped out from the crowd and stood on the battle platform. He held a dragon halberd in his hand and pointed it at the 6 demons. Chapter 1225. Junior brother, you just went through a huge battle. Let me take over this battle. Yuan Tianji looked at the 6 demons coldly, his face full of fighting spirit. Seeing this, Li Ruli nodded immediately. Lu Ming, take a rest first. The reason why he used the righteousness of the human race to guide the elites was because he wanted to win this battle with the help of these human elites. Although the 6 demon youths each had a strong demonic aura and were extremely powerful. However, there were still a few human echelon cultivators standing below the battle platform. They were all heroes of the present age. Yao Guang, the bodhisattva of the West Pole, was born with a Buddhist nature and was truly at the top of the world. Even Yuan Tianji, Wu Lei, Shun Jinggan, and the rest were famous and outstanding among their peers. With them taking on the enemy, the human race might not lose this battle. However, what puzzled Li Rulin was which clan did these demon youths come from? What was their real motive for coming here? The Heaven Pole God of War has shown the might of the human race. The God of War is invincible. All the heaven's favorites exclaimed in excitement. Yuan Tianji, the successor of the God of War Palace. This young war god had already proven his talent in the divine Tao stage just now. Although in the end, his achievements were completely overshadowed by Lord Ling Xiao and praising the Empress. However, 799 divine level was still a height that most of the elites present could not reach. Feng Yin, you go. Seeing Yuan Tianji in heavy armor and holding a divine halberd, the golden-robed girl's lips curled into a sly smile. Any cultivator who used a halberd must have extremely terrifying physical strength. However, no matter how terrifying it was, how could it be compared to the demon race? Yes, Miss Wang. Beside her, a burly youth with a head full of white hair grinned and took a step forward. His figure instantly turned into a graceful swan and descended from the sky. Boom! An ear-piercing, buzzing sound suddenly resounded. Billowing demonic aura turned into long clouds outside Feng Yan's body. He did not give Yuan Tianji any time to exchange pleasantries and suddenly struck with his palm. Humph! You are courting death. Yuan Tianji's eyes trembled slightly. At this moment, he could feel the terrifying pressure in the space around him. He didn't dare to hesitate in the slightest. The dragon halberd in his hand shot out a spiritual radiance as it transformed into a dragon and stabbed out. Woo, 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 woo. The blue sky wailed as 10,000 Daos bloomed. A strand of black light stretched out for thousands of miles and tore through space, completely sealing off Feng Yan's path of retreat. However, in the face of Yuan Tianji's absolute halberd move, the monstrous race youth didn't have a trace of seriousness on his face. Instead, he looked disdainful. Then, his hand seals began to appear, and layers of feathers began to appear on his palm. Yuan Tianji's halberd finally collided with the demonic claw. Boom! Thunder resounded as the blue dome of heaven shattered. What was even more frightening was that the scene of Feng Yin vomiting blood and flying backward, as everyone had imagined, did not happen. On the contrary, he clenched his fist and directly grabbed the halberd. Before Yuan Tianji could react, he pulled the halberd. Yuan Tianji's eyes narrowed as a dazzling divine radiance erupted from his body. His entire body suddenly grew taller and stronger, like a true god of war. He threw a punch at Feng Yan. Oh, interesting. Seeing this, Feng Yan laughed instead of being surprised. He casually threw a punch and collided with Yuan Tianji. Boom, boom, boom. Above the void, the two figures alternated as their bodies constantly collided. Dao patterns and demonic qi filled the air, intimidating everyone. However, gradually, Yuan Tianji's aura rapidly weakened. His outer armor shattered, and his figure was directly smashed down by Feng Yan's punch, falling onto the battle stage. Boom! Smoke and dust rose as the entire battle stage instantly shattered. Feng Yan stood in the void, coldly looking at the figure that struggled several times but failed to stand up. He smiled contemptuously. This is your human race's god of war. You can't even withstand a single blow. Puffed. Hearing this, Yuan Tianji immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with defeat. At this moment, more than half of his bones had already been broken. Even his internal organs in his dantian were about to shatter under Feng Yan's repeated attacks. No matter how unwilling he was still disheartened, and his eyes were filled with sorrow. Next, Feng Yan turned his head and looked at the many human race geniuses below the battle stage. At this moment, the crowd was no longer as noisy and angry as before. Yuan Tianji had been defeated. In just a few breaths, he had been utterly defeated. Although the successor of the god of War Palace wasn't the strongest in the human race, he was still a well-known figure among the crowd. Even Xin Jingan, Wu Lei, and the others might not be his match even if they used all their strength. However, he was still defeated and couldn't hurt Feng Yan at all. What? Is there no one else? Feng Yan sneered and looked arrogant. Weren't you very arrogant just now? Let me. Wu Lei took a deep breath. The feeling of being looked down upon by the demon race was extremely depressing. Although he might not be Feng Yan's match with his strength, the human race couldn't lose its backbone. Why don't all of you come at me together? I'm afraid you're not enough. Feng Yan shook his head and looked down at the crowd. His light brown eyes were filled with disdain. Oof. Arrogant. Wu Lei's face darkened, and he suddenly stepped forward. However, the moment he appeared on the battle stage, the figure in the void suddenly clenched his fist. A sacred sun sunk from the horizon and was actually held up by him with one hand. Boundless multicolored light fell from the sky, crashing down toward Wu Lei. Divine light surged, and the heavenly Tao shook. Endless Taoist rhymes flowed and spewed out like a dazzling galaxy. Wu Lei's face changed drastically, and his body suddenly lit up. However, before he could do anything, he was annihilated by the divine light and no longer made a sound. Heaven and earth fell silent. The entire mountain of paths was still. Intense shock and fear appeared on the faces of all the human race geniuses. Originally, everyone thought that Feng Yan's strength lay in his physical strength. However, it seemed that the reason he competed with Yuan Tianji in terms of physical strength was actually to deliberately humiliate him. The geniuses only recovered from their shock when they heard another cry of blood from the battle stage. At this moment, Wu Lei's figure knelt on the ground. He was covered in blood and looked as though he was burned by flames. Even his skin emitted a burning stench. As for his aura, it had withered to the extreme. He was killed in one move. In fact, if not for the fact that this was the sacred ground of the human race, and the group of demon youths had some reservations, Wu Lei and Yuan Tianji, the two outstanding talents of the current generation, would not have the slightest chance of survival. Everyone knew that the combat strength of the demon race was above that of the human race. However, no one expected that this kind of strength was so direct that there was no room for comparison at all. Suppression, silence, shame? Could it be that the human race was really going to be suppressed and intimidated by a few demon youths in the sacred ground of the academy today? Sigh. Below the battle stage, Lu Ming sighed softly. He was about to lift his leg and walk towards Feng Yan when he suddenly heard a buzzing sound in the distance. Buzz! A terrifying wave that made one's scalp turn numb swept out from the depths of the academy, and spread over the sky. Everyone was stunned and turned to look. In the next moment, their eyes narrowed. Chapter 12:26. Buzz. The void trembled as purple clouds rose. Amidst the clouds, a white-robed figure stood in the clouds with his hands behind his back. He arrived in front of everyone with a single step. It was a young man with a cold and resolute face. His black hair was tied into a Taoist bun with strands hanging down. He looked otherworldly and elegant. Although there was no aura emanating from his body, just by standing there, he made the world fall silent and the sun and moon lose their light. In particular, his fair and handsome face made many geniuses' expressions freeze. Their red lips were tightly pursed, and their eyes revealed a hint of surprise. It's Senior Brother Wuya. Senior Brother Wuya has come out of seclusion. Waves of cheers resounded, and a wisp of indescribable excitement appeared on the faces of countless Academy disciples. Boundless Tao, the true number one of the Dao Tian Academy's generation. His talent was unparalleled, and his Taoist techniques were natural. He was the only disciple in the past 10,000 years who had been brought to the Saint Peak to cultivate by the Academy Master. Unexpectedly, Senior Brother Wuya came out of seclusion when the human race was in danger. Senior Brother Wuya, please strengthen the human race. Senior Brother Wuya, strengthen the human race. Cheers suddenly resounded. Countless Academy disciples clenched their fists and shouted at the top of their lungs. The defeat of Yuan Tianji and Wu Lei had already caused many people to despair. After all, with their strength, they were at the top of the human race. However, they were not a match for the demon race youth. The appearance of Boundless Tao was a kind of hope for everyone. Boundless Tao? In front of the crowd, the golden-robed woman nodded slightly with a bright smile. She had some understanding of the sequence and heavenly elites of the human race before coming. The number one of the four academies was not in the sequence only because he had already been in seclusion when he was at the peak of his power. After 100 years, although he had not stepped into the saint realm, he had a trace of nature's will. Obviously, this was a strong enemy, far from what the two from before could compare to. Feng Yin, come back. Yes. Feng Yin frowned slightly. The surging battle intent in his eyes quietly turned cold. He descended from the sky and landed behind the golden-robed woman. At this moment, although he was unwilling in his heart, he obviously did not dare to disobey in the slightest. Everyone's eyes flashed with a trace of astonishment when they saw this scene. Just what was the identity of this lady in gold? Why was even Feng Yin so respectful toward her? Mo Ling, you go. The golden-robed woman smiled gently. Even though she had never seen Boundless Tao in action, compared to the human race, the demon race's advantage lay in their physical abilities. So what if it's the nature of the Tao? Mo Ling's innate divine ability was something that even she was extremely wary of. Yes, Miss Wang. Behind him, a gloomy-looking young man in black immediately bowed and saluted. Then, he took a step forward and wind swirled around him. He turned into a blur and appeared on the battle platform. 9th rank of the Exalted Realm, you're very strong. Mo Ling raised his head and looked at Dao Wuya coldly. Compared to Feng Yin, his personality was calmer, but his every move carried a wisp of gloominess, causing people to feel inexplicably fearful. You're not bad yourself, Imperial Wind Power. Dao Wuya looked indifferent. When he was on the Saint Peak, he had already felt the spiritual might and demonic qi. Originally, he had already made up his mind to not come out of seclusion until he reached the Saint Realm. But the dignity of the human race was not to be challenged. Moreover, if these demons defeated the current generation of geniuses at the Daotian Academy today, this sacred land of the human race would become a complete laughingstock. As the current number one of the four academies, Dao Wuya would not allow this to happen. Haha, not bad. After so many years, this is the first time someone has said that I'm not bad. Mo Ling shook his head and smiled. His body suddenly rose into the sky. Around him, endless demonic light surged, vast and ferocious. Then he pressed down with his palm, and the world instantly turned dark. His body strangely disappeared from everyone's sight. Daoya frowned slightly. His eyes overflowed with clear light and thousands of Dao inscriptions. It was unknown when a green ancient sword had appeared in his hand, and an extremely cold aura quietly filled the entire area. Buzz! Tens of thousands of sword light slashed horizontally, and a crack appeared in the originally dark sky. The sun shone down, and light reappeared. But now, Daoya's face did not relax at all. Instead, he became even more cautious, because at this moment, he still could not sense the aura of the demon youth. It was as if he had completely disappeared without a trace. Not even a trace of his aura was left. Buzz! Suddenly, there was a buzzing sound in the sky. One after another, ink-colored feathers appeared at the end of the sky eerily. Flames burned on them, and they contained a terrifying heat that made one's heart palpitate. Then, under everyone's shocked gaze, the countless ink-colored feathers suddenly turned into a black torrent and enveloped Daoya. That speed was extremely fast. Like a bird descending to the world, it instantly appeared above the head of the Academy's number 1. Seeing this, countless people's faces changed, and their eyes trembled. Some of the more cowardly people had already closed their eyes and turned their heads, their bodies trembling. This kind of attack was simply unavoidable. Even if Dao Wuya's cultivation was terrifying, he would not be able to escape unscathed. Buzz, however. What was surprising was that Dao Wuya did not have any intention of retreating. Instead, he turned into a green rainbow and used his sword to split open the sky, going against the rain of feathers. Just now, the moment the attack landed, he sensed a trace of Mo Ling's aura. And with this demon prodigy's methods, once he hid in the dark and focused on sneak attacks, even Dao Wuya would have a headache. Boom! Boom! Boundless strange phenomena bloomed in the sky, and the killing intent was immeasurable. Around Dao Wuya, clear light danced for thousands of miles, forming its own spiritual aura. And when the rain of feathers descended about 10 feet away from him, it was shattered by an invisible sword aura. It turned into flowing flames, and it was extremely dazzling. But with Dao Wuya's speed, he was no match for Imperial Wind Mo Ling. Therefore, when he appeared in the depths of the dark light, there was no trace of Mo Ling. At the same time, a new round of feathers condensed and came down from the sky. Damn it, that demon prodigy is so cunning. He only dares to hide in the dark. If this continues, senior brother Wu, you will be exhausted to death. That's right. If you have the guts, show yourself and fight. What's the point of hiding? Below the battle stage, countless disciples were filled with righteous indignation. Clearly, they were not happy with Mo Ling's methods. Show yourself and fight? As if hearing the crowd's mockery, a cold laugh came from the depths of the void. Then, Mo Ling's figure appeared in the sky. He stood in the air and looked down at Dao Wuya coldly. At the moment, there were many bloody wounds on the latter's body. They were so deep that his bones could be seen. However, his aura did not weaken in the slightest, and even his face was cold and indifferent. Fine, then I will let you human ants see the true power of the Black Mandarin tribe. Mo Ling grinned, revealing a mouthful of sharp white teeth. Behind him, a demon shadow descended from the sky. Its wings were hundreds of feet long, covering the sky and burning with endless death flames. Black Mandarin tribe, that you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.